She started from nothing and really built her way up. There was the glam, there was the beauty, there were the cars, the houses.
Srimati Indrani Mukherjee, the CEO of INX Media.
What has happened to Sheena?
Breaking news just coming in. Media tycoon Indrani Mukherjee has been arrested by the Mumbai police on charges of murdering her sister almost 3 years ago.
It's a case that has confused, fascinated, and shocked us all.
What is the precise motive that could have led Indrani to kill Sheena in cold-blooded murder?
Go on then. Ask me whatever you need to.
Each and every character of this particular story is extremely unique. Everybody has got their individual agendas.
Sheena, who till yesterday we thought was Indrani's sister, has turned out to be her daughter.
स्टार्टिंग में अगर एक झूठ ब्रॉडकास्ट हो जाता है, सबको ये जानना जरूरी है कि पहला सच है क्या.
Peter's son, Indrani's daughter are involved.
The son of the current husband is seeing the daughter of Indrani's previous marriage.
The family themselves, they're leaking a story a minute.
Do I believe someone within the family knows what's happened to Sheena? Absolutely.
Did you murder your daughter, Sheena?
What a stupid question.
No, I want to proceed with the jury, and we've been waiting for almost 30 minutes for the juror to arrive because, or she's indicated that she was late because of traffic, and now we're ready, and I certainly don't want to delay that in any way.
Two quick issues then. On the tape, which I have now listened to, Mr. Goodreau indicates that he had some conversation with Mr. Stevens about molestation, and I believe the defense wants to ask Mr. Stevens about that. Our position on that would be that if that is offered as either fresh complaint or prior consistent statement, that it is not an issue until the defendant, unless and until the defendant testifies. The other issue is that I believe the defense wants to ask Mr. Goodreau about some mafia connections and perhaps—
Mr. Goodreau or Mr. Stevens?
Sorry, I misspoke, Mr. Stevens, about whether or not he had connections to the mafia, and I don't know precisely what the question is, but I know that's the issue. Perhaps Mr. Bird or Ms. Lansing could frame the issue.
All right, let me just say this, that we have been waiting for about a half hour for the juror to arrive, and if counsel had matters that you wanted to discuss prior to the resumption of testimony before the jury, we had that half an hour that could have been used for that purpose. Now, it certainly doesn't require us to wait for the jurors to all arrive before you bring these matters to my attention that you want to have resolved before we proceed with the jury. So common sense and reasonable thought would indicate that you would bring these things to my attention at 9 o'clock or earlier so that they can be resolved while we're waiting for the jury.
I notified the clerk at least 15 minutes ago that we had these matters outside the presence.
Well, I learned about it just about 2 minutes ago, just before I came out.
I'm sorry, Your Honor, but I did notify the clerk, and I did it in the presence, I know, of Ms. Lansing.
All right, well, in the future—
We're not allowed to notify the court directly.
Well, that's obvious. You're not allowed to talk to me directly, but in the future, make sure that it's communicated clearly that these are matters that have to be heard before the jury proceeds, before we start up with the jury, not just that you have some matter that you want to talk about. All right, what is the defense position on these two matters?
Your Honor, our position with regard to the statement to Mr. Goodreau is to give context that the tape contains the conversation that was on the television program and some additional material. One statement in particular is that he talks about the fact that the first time he heard about the molestation was when Lyle had the discussion with him in the Chinese restaurant.
You're talking about Goodreau.
Goodreau. So the second time he heard about it was when Glenn Stevens told him the same thing, that he had the same information. And he, in his own words, he said, it freaked me out. Glenn told me that he heard the same thing. So I did want to ask him about that area. But I realized that that is probably contingent upon the court's ruling about what we do with regard to the areas with Mr. Goodreau. They're obviously tied together, and it's not
Right.
saying Mr. Kazan is going to object to going into that material at this time, because it's technically part of the defense case. The second item is with regard to mafia connections. And it was my intention to ask Mr. Stevens about it, because it is my information that he bragged on a regular basis that his family had mafia connections, and that in fact, on an occasion in which Lyle Menendez expressed to him his concern that the mafia was going to be upset with them, looking for them, that they were endangered by the mafia, he talked to Mr. Stevens about this, and in response to that request, Mr. Stevens took Lyle Menendez into New York to meet with an alleged mafia figure, whom he had connections with through his uncle, who I believe's name is Fat Tony Salerno, and Mr. Stevens' family name is Salerno. And that this meeting took place in order for Lyle Menendez to talk to this person about the danger that he perceived, and to hopefully get the word out so that that danger could be eliminated. And so it was my intention to go into this issue with Mr. Stevens with regard to this trip, what the purpose was, who set it up, where it took place, etc.
That your client went and spoke with someone who was reputed to be a member of the mafia, so that your client could protect himself from assault or attack by the people who allegedly killed his parents. That's what you want to introduce.
Well, yes, it is. And I think through Mr. Menendez's testimony will be, the parameters of that will be explained, what his fear was, what the genesis of the fear was, and why it was he wanted to talk to them about it. And I can explain, I'll be happy to make the offer of proof to the court at this point in time. The story was out that this was a mob hit, and this did not start necessarily with Lyle Menendez, but it was printed in the Wall Street Journal, etc. Mr. Menendez was very concerned that since his perception of the mafia was that they would know that they didn't do it, and that he was supposedly, and his brother, more specifically, were pointing fingers at the mafia, that they would not be very happy with the Menendez brothers for this activity. And so the purpose of this visit was to explain to them that they weren't going to do that anymore, and to try and call off the dogs, more or less, because he believed that they were, in fact, gunning for him because of the fact that in their effort to cover their own tracks, this story, I think more of it was coming out from Eric, but it was certainly coming out from both of the boys that it was possibly mob related, and it was an attempt to diffuse that information. And that was the purpose of the meeting.
Was there some disclosure by your client to this reputed member of the mafia that he was in fact the person responsible for his parents' death, so he had nothing to worry about by these false accusations? Or?
No, I think it was an effort to say that, we're not going to be giving the police that kind of information, and, it started with other sources in an attempt to explain how it had happened, because it didn't, a lot of other people were pursuing that angle rather than Mr. Menendez, and he wanted to communicate that he was not providing information to them. He had some concern with what his father's connections may or may not have been, what they would have thought he might or might not have known. And it was an attempt to try and eliminate some of this discussion that was going on at the time. So that would be the purpose of going into Mr. Stevens' background and his facilitating this trip.
All right, what is the people's response to that?
Your Honor, first of all, I think part of this is an attempt to use character evidence to discredit Mr. Stevens' testimony. Secondly, I think under 352 that the probative value of this particular information is far outweighed by its prejudicial effect. Mr. Stevens will further testify that Mr. Menendez, Lyle Menendez, wanted to rub shoulders with these people, and I think that is also prejudicial to the defendant, but I think it's prejudicial to Mr. Stevens in a way that is very tangential to the issues in this case. And so under 352, I think it should be excluded, and it's also character evidence, which I think is inappropriate in this case.
All right, was there mention in the direct examination of Mr. Stevens of the mafia, or the defendant referring to the mafia as the cause of, or the source of the his parents' death?
I know there was with Mr. Laskowski. I don't really recall if there was with Mr. Stevens.
I do, there was mention of it.
All right, I don't have that in my notes, not that that was conclusive. But at this point, it would seem to be beyond the scope of the direct examination unless there were specific references to explanations offered by the defendant regarding the killing of his parents and who had done it.
Your Honor, it's clearly been the position of the prosecution to date that Lyle Menendez's claims of fear of bodyguards, of bulletproof vests, of the wanting protection and being afraid was false, and that this was somehow an effort to cover up his own tracks. And it is our position that while he was obviously denying the crime at this point in time, that the fear was genuine. And I think Mr. Stevens he is a recipient witness to this meeting and the purpose of this meeting, and it would be our desire to go into it. Now, I presume that the court can indicate that that's a matter of affirmative defense, and we would do it when Mr. Stevens comes back. That's the posture the court wants to take.
Well, there was reference, and you can help me out here, regarding somebody going to representative of the mafia and smoothing some things out, and that was a relative of the defendant. I don't recall which witness testified to that, whether it was Mr. Winkowski or Mr. Stevens.
I believe the testimony was that he had spoken with his uncle Carlos and that it had been arranged that way.
Right. Well, as of now, unless counsel can refer me to the specific testimony and you can seek the assistance of the court reporter in regards to any explanations the defendant might have made to Mr. Stevens relating to who he suspected had killed his parents, the court would be inclined to rule that evidence that you're now seeking to introduce would be beyond the scope of the direct examination as it's occurred so far. The people are still conducting their direct examination.
Your Honor, I did find in my notes a specific reference to Mr. Winkowski where the people asked.
No, I'm talking about Mr. Stevens.
But it's evidence that they have produced that Lyle Menendez told them that he thought that the people who had killed his parents, the people that he was afraid of either the cartel or the mob.
Yeah, I don't dispute that that's admissible evidence in the defense. It's a question of whether it's proper to bring it out during the cross-examination of Mr. Stevens. And unless that has been explored with him in some way and then becomes relevant within the scope of the proper cross-examination, depending on what was brought out in direct examination, then it might be something that would have to be deferred until the defense. And if the prosecution is representing to the court that the prosecution at its own expense will bring these witnesses back, then it could be done then.
I've just found in my notes where Mr. Stevens said, in response to a question on direct, that Lyle believed that the mafia was responsible for his parents' death and he feared them. And I can have the court reporter find that just by going through the order of my notes.
Okay. All right. Well, you can do that. And how long is the direct going to be before it's completed with Mr. Stevens?
Half an hour, yes.
Okay. So perhaps you can do other matters on cross, and then we'll take a short break and see if the reporter can find that. It could be that that part has already been transcribed and ready to be distributed.
And then on the issue of the statement that Mr. Stevens made to Mr. Goodreau.
If you represent to me that you'll bring these people back at the district attorney's expense, then it's properly dealt with in rebuttal in the defense case. It's not pertinent until the defendant testifies, and then the issue is whether this is a prior consistent statement based upon the people's attack of Mr. Lyle Menendez's testimony as a recent fabrication. And the defense is entitled to show that it wasn't a recent fabrication, but there was things said or were things said prior to the time of his arrest that are in conformity with his testimony.
Thank you.
All right.
Did I get the witness?
Yes. And at this point, then we'll have the jury come out.
Does the court mind when there's no jury behind us? I just have a question for you.
As long as you have the microphone on, because again, leave those things on unless you're talking privately about something, because your voice is not being picked up. All right, all the jurors are present. Good morning to you all.
Good morning, Your Honor.
And just a reminder that we cannot start with proceedings involving the jury unless and until we have all 18 of you here. So the last person to arrive is the person that determines when we start. So it's incumbent upon all of you to get here early and, if necessary, doubly early so that we don't have to wait. There's always things that delay the proceedings when the lawyers have matters they want me to discuss with them. And I know it's frustrating for you that we have you here on time and then you come in and you have to wait. I apologize for those occurrences when they happen, and I can assure you they'll happen in the future. But regardless of that, it's still important that we have you all here at the same time I tell you to be here so that when we are ready, we can start up without any further delay. With so many people involved, we have 18 of you, and when we have the other jury in the courtroom at the same time, 36 people that have to all be here on time, in addition to all the court staff and the people involved in the case, the lawyers and everyone else. So it's very important we get everybody here at the same time. All right, then we'll proceed with the testimony of Mr. Stevens before the Lyle Menendez jury only. And would you state your name again for the record?
Glenn Stevens.
All right, Mr. Stevens, I'll remind you that you're still under oath. All right, you may proceed.
Mr. Stevens, your freshman year at Princeton, which ended in the spring of 1989, do you remember approximately how much the tuition, room, and board was?
Somewhere around $22,000 probably.
Now, in the spring of 1989, before the deaths of the parents, you spent, I think you testified, a lot of time with Lyle Menendez. Is that correct?
Yes.
Did he have lots of spending money in terms of cash at that time?
Before the deaths of the parents, no.
Right. And when you went places or to eat or things like that, did it appear to you that he had a lot of money?
Well, I was aware of the wealth of his parents and whatnot, but he never had physically had much cash on himself.
Right. Now, in early May of 1989, before the deaths, Donovan Goodreau was living with Lyle inside of his room, correct?
Yes.
And at some point, did you have any discussions with Lyle Menendez about ejecting Mr. Goodreau from the accommodations at Princeton?
Yes.
Okay. And what was the discussion about? And did you advise Lyle Menendez of certain things?
Well, yes. Myself, Greg Guest, and Hayden Rogers all went to Lyle to make him aware that we had discovered some things that Donovan had been lying about.
And did you, the three of you, have this discussion in each other's presence with Lyle Menendez?
Yes, I believe so.
Do you recall yourself, though, giving information to Lyle Menendez about Donovan Goodreau?
Yes.
And how long before Mr. Goodreau actually was ejected was it that you gave Lyle Menendez the information?
Well, period of just a few days. And once I told Lyle about it, we proceeded to eject Donovan from the room.
And what did you tell Lyle Menendez?
Well, I had told Lyle Menendez that there were a lot of things that Donovan had been telling us that were just blatant lies.
Right. And did you urge Lyle Menendez to do something in regard to these lies?
I said, well, not only is Donovan telling us blatant lies, but there was an incident where Lyle had some money missing from the room. So I immediately assumed that possibly he was the one that was responsible for the money missing. And I said, obviously you can't trust this guy.
What did Lyle tell you in response to what you told him?
To be honest, he didn't seem happy about it. I think he felt a special bond with Donovan, and he was reluctant to expel Donovan from the room.
Did you have more than one conversation with Lyle Menendez about your suspicions?
Yes, it was discussed on a few occasions. And also, I believe it was discussed in front of Terry Baralt, the aunt.
All right. So this would have been at what period of time before Donovan was actually asked to leave?
Like I said, the few days before.
When Donovan did finally leave, did you ever see his wallet?
Yes.
Could you tell us about that, please?
Yes. Donovan, we packed up his truck, and Donovan went out the window and left. And soon thereafter, that day, Lyle held up a leather wallet, told me that it was Donovan's and that he had kept it.
Okay, did he say what he was going to do with it?
Well, we sat down on the bed and went through the wallet to see what was in it. And there was, I remember distinctly, a Wells Fargo card and Donovan's driver's license. And he was, I don't know if he told me this or if I was just under the impression, but.
I'm going to object then, Your Honor.
Okay.
He can't testify to his impression.
Yeah, okay. You understand what the objection is?
Yes.
All right. Did Lyle tell you that he'd stolen the wallet?
He told me that he had kept it.
Okay, did he ever tell you he was going to return it to Donovan?
No.
Did he tell you he was going to do anything with any of the articles inside of the wallet?
He had mentioned about the Wells Fargo card that Donovan had a big account.
And what did he say he was
in
going to do?
He wanted to try and retrieve the money that was stolen from him.
Do you know about how much money was involved in this theft?
I know it was a small amount, somewhere around $100, $150, something like that.
All right. Did he say anything else to you about any handwriting he was going to do?
Well,
Object. May we have a moment?
Yeah. Okay. All right. After you saw the wallet in his possession, did you ever see it again after that day?
No, I don't believe so. I can't recall ever seeing it again.
Did you ever have possession of the wallet?
No.
Okay.
It never left the room as far as I know.
Okay. When he held up the wallet to you, what was his demeanor like?
He was laughing about it.
Was he crying when Donovan left?
I do remember that he seemed reluctant to ask Donovan to leave. He was sort of upset that it had come to this eventuality, but he accepted it.
Now, how long was it after that he held up the wallet and was laughing? And in other words, after Donovan left and Lyle Menendez was upset, how much after that did he hold it up and laugh about the wallet?
Within an hour.
Now, the summer of 1989, the summer after your freshman year, I believe you testified that you had telephone contact with Lyle Menendez, but that was all. Is that correct? Okay. After the deaths of his parents, I believe you indicated you went shopping for automobiles, correct?
Correct.
And were you actually with Lyle Menendez when he completed the purchase of a Porsche?
I believe so.
Your Honor, I have here some documents. I'd like to mark them as Exhibit 55, which I believe is next in order. The defense has a copy. Did you ever see the preparation of any of the documents used to purchase the Porsche?
We went there over a period of time on several occasions to fill out some of the paperwork, to test drive the car over and over again. And there were several times that paperwork was done in my presence.
Right. Your Honor, counsel, will you stipulate that Exhibit 55 is an accurate business record of the transaction, which it purports to depict?
So stipulated.
Okay, thank you. May I approach, please?
Yes.
You said you test drove the car. Do you know about how many times?
I remember one time distinctly where I was in the car when it was test driven, and I know of other times when Lyle went and test drove the car when I wasn't there.
All right. So you can testify to at least one test drive that you participated in?
Yes.
And these records appear to be from a place called John Wood. It looks like a Porsche Audi dealership on Route 1 in North Princeton. Is that the dealership at which the car was purchased?
Correct.
All right. And do you remember what kind of vehicle it was? Was it new or used?
It was a demo model, I believe. It was used, but it was still a late model.
Okay. And was there any kind of customization that was done to it?
It was a limited edition Porsche. It was a 911 Carrera Cabriolet limited edition. I don't know about customization or anything like that.
Did it have one of those fins in back?
Yeah.
Okay. Do you remember about how much this automobile cost?
Between $60,000 and $70,000.
I believe you also mentioned yesterday that you had gone with Lyle Menendez for real estate, gone shopping for real estate?
Correct.
Your Honor, I have here two more exhibits. I'd like to mark them as 56 and 57. 56 will be the one for $265 and $265,000. And the other one is for $128,000. Counsel, will you stipulate that exhibits 56 and 57 are accurate business records which depict the transaction contained therein, and that the escrows contained in 56 and 57 did not close?
So stipulated.
All right. Now, do you remember the name of the location where these homes were contained? The name of the development?
It was next to the Market Fair Mall. I can't remember right now offhand the name of the development.
Okay, if I showed you the documents, do you think perhaps that would refresh your memory?
Yes.
Your Honor, I'm showing the witness exhibits 56 and 57.
Canal Point, right.
All right. And were you with him at any time when he actually gave money to the people there at this development?
I don't recall so.
And now, was this one of those places where they were building them and selling them as they went along, or were they already built, or how did that work?
I don't know if the development was finished or not. I don't. The one patio home that Lyle was looking at hadn't been completed on the inside, I think.
Who was going to live in this patio home?
Lyle had told me he planned to live there.
Okay, did he tell you why he had two of them and why he was buying two?
I didn't really. There were two condominiums and one patio home. I don't remember a second patio home. I think it was trying to choose between two of them. I don't know that he was going to purchase two of them.
Now, I believe you testified yesterday that in the spring of 1990, after the deaths, that you dropped out of Princeton for a year, or for a period of time. Is that correct?
I took a year's leave of absence, yes.
Okay, I'm sorry, dropped out is not the right word. Did you notify the university that you would be coming back?
Yes.
Right. And what was your purpose in leaving the university for a year?
Well, Lyle needed help with some of his real estate transactions and the restaurant and things like that. And I also wasn't very happy with the university. I wanted to take a year's leave of absence anyway. So the two things sort of fit together well. He needed help and I needed a year off. So I could take a year off and work for him. I'd have a job. I'd be taken care of.
And ultimately, you did graduate from Princeton University, correct?
Yes, that's correct. This June.
And what was your major?
Politics.
Right.
Sorry, I didn't hear that.
Politics, with no intention of doing such.
Right. Did you then, after you left the university for a year, spend a great deal of time with Lyle Menendez?
Yes.
Sometime around the holidays of 1989, 1990, that Christmas and New Year's, did you come to California?
Yes.
And was that with Lyle Menendez?
I met him out here. I didn't come with him on the plane or anything.
Did you come to visit him then?
Yes.
And that was before you had made the final decision to leave the university for a year?
Yes, that's correct.
Where did you stay when you were out here?
In the Marina Del Rey apartment.
All right. Did you ever go to the Beverly Hills house during that period of time?
It's possible.
Do you have any specific recollection of doing so?
Not at the moment.
Sometime then in late February or early March of 1990, did you again travel to Los Angeles?
Yes.
Okay. And who did you travel with at that time?
Lyle and Hayden Rogers.
Okay. Now, Hayden Rogers is this other friend that's been described in the testimony. Is that correct?
Yes.
And at the time that you and Hayden and Lyle Menendez traveled to California, were you all on the same flight?
Yes.
And at that time, was Hayden still a student at Princeton, or was he also not?
He had been asked to leave for several years.
Several years?
For 2.5 years.
All right. When you came out on the plane, did Lyle Menendez leave for a period of time and make a telephone call?
He made a telephone call on the flight, yes.
Okay. Was that done in your presence?
It was one of those credit card phones on the flight, and it wasn't in the seat in front of us, so he had to get up and do it. It was in my sight, but it wasn't in my presence.
So you couldn't hear what he was saying, is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. When he came back from the phone call, did he say something to you?
Yes, he told me that he had called the restaurant.
Okay. And when he said the restaurant, did you understand what he meant by that?
I understood Chuck Spring Street Cafe.
Now, at the time that he made this phone call, were you already employed there, or were you starting your employment there, or how did that work?
I had already decided to take a year off from Princeton. I had notified the university, and I understood myself to be in Lyle's employment already. I'm not sure if I had physically started in the restaurant, because that decision that I was to work at the restaurant might have been made later.
All right. And when he came back from making the phone call, he indicated that he'd called the restaurant, correct?
Correct.
What else did he say?
He said that the Beverly Hills police had been at the restaurant looking for him.
And how did he appear when he made the statement to you?
nervous.
All right. Then what happened?
He took a large sum of money out of his pocket. It was approximately $2,000, and split it between Hayden and myself. And he also took out a business card for a gentleman by the name of Gerald Chaliff.
Okay. And did he indicate to you who Mr. Chaliff was?
He said that Mr. Chaliff was his attorney.
What did he do with the money in the business card?
He gave, it wasn't exactly half. He gave about $1,200 of the dollars or $1,400 of the dollars to me and the rest to Hayden. And the business card he gave to me and told me, when we get into California, if anything should happen to me, you call Gerald Chaliff because he knows everything, and tell him what happened if something was to happen.
And he wasn't more specific about what might happen at that time?
Well, he said, he discussed that Gerald Chaliff knew everything. And I asked him, what do you mean know everything? And then he didn't elaborate on that until he discussed the tapes of Jerome Oziel.
All right. Now, when he discussed the tapes of Jerome Oziel, was that during the same plane flight, or was that at a...
Yes, it was in the same discussion where the business card was taken out.
All right. And what did he tell you about that?
He told me that he had been going to a psychologist, Jerome Oziel, either him or his brother had been going, and that Dr. Oziel had made some tapes of discussions between himself and the doctor.
Did Lyle Menendez tell you where he thought the tapes were located?
Yes, he told me that Dr. Oziel had them in a safe deposit box.
Did he tell you what might happen if that box were revealed?
Yes, he said, if the police get their hands on those tapes, and I quote, he said, I'm fucked.
And that was the end of the discussion, is that correct?
Pretty much.
All right. On March the 8th of 1990, were you in Beverly Hills, California?
Yes.
And were you present at the time that Lyle Menendez was arrested?
Yes.
Shortly after that, were you asked by someone to retrieve something from Lyle's Porsche?
Yes.
Okay. First of all, do you know how the Porsche came to be in California after its purchase in Princeton? Do you know from your own knowledge, not from what someone told you?
It was shipped, I believe, back to California.
And did someone ask you to go to the Porsche and get something out of the Porsche?
The Porsche was in a audio shop getting a stereo put in, and I was asked to go and get in the back of the Porsche a box, a backgammon box, I believe it was.
Oh, and did you, in fact, go and get that backgammon box?
Yes, I did.
And where were you told to take that box?
I was told to take it to Gerald Chaliff.
And did you, in fact, meet Mr. Chaliff?
I went to his office. He wasn't there. We called from a payphone and tried to get in touch with him, and he eventually met us at a gas station that evening where we handed it over to him.
All right, and that was the last you saw of the box, is that correct?
Yes.
Now, when you say it was a backgammon box, what do you mean by that?
It was a box that a backgammon game had come packaged in.
So did it have something on the top that looked like a backgammon board? Or?
Yeah, like chess, backgammon, multiple set, or something like that.
And could you describe how big the box was? When you talk about a game, was it like a Monopoly box or different?
It was a little bit smaller. Like this was probably a fold-up backgammon thing or something that was inside. It was about that big, the box.
Indicating about 12 to 14 inches, Your Honor.
Yeah.
Okay. And you, in fact, did turn it over. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Did you look inside the box before you turned it over?
Yes, on the ride to Gerald Chaliff's office, I opened it.
And did you go through it?
Mm-hmm.
Is that yes?
Yes.
Okay, and what did you see inside the box?
There was...
just generally, what did you see in the box?
There was a collection of personal letters, family things of the Menendez family.
Did you see any photographs in there?
Yes, I believe so.
All right. And it appeared to be things from the Menendez family?
Yes.
Thank you. I have nothing further.
Cross-examination.
Thank you. Morning, Mr. Stevens.
Good morning.
This box that you referred to, who asked you to get the box out of the car?
It was Jamie Pisarcik, I believe.
Now, have you told the police on different occasions that it was Jamie Pisarcik and also that it was Steve Goldberg?
Yes, I misspoke on one occasion. I believe that Jamie Pisarcik told me to get it on the orders of Steve Goldberg.
Do you know for sure, or are you just trying to
No, I don't.
reconstruct? So it could have been
I'm trying to reconstruct it. I just remember that I was told to get the box. I remember that I got it. And when you asked me the question before, you jogged my memory, and it was Jamie actually that asked me to get it.
Okay, I asked you because there was a police report in which you'd said that Steve Goldberg was the one. Is that correct?
Yes.
Is it fair to say that not all of these events are crystal clear in your mind?
Certainly, it was 4 years ago. I'm trying the best I can.
Okay. And in some cases, are you just trying to put together things in terms of what makes sense, what's logical, what you think would have happened, rather than specific memory?
Well, I'm trying the best I can to come up with specific memory.
Okay. But in some cases, such as the situation about who asked you to get the box, things are a little fuzzy.
At the time that I say it, I believe it to be true, so.
Okay, so when you said it was Jamie Pisarcik, you believed it to be true. When you said it was Steve Goldberg, you believed it to be true.
Yes, that's a fair statement.
And whoever it is who asked you to get the box out of the car, were you given any instructions with regard to whether you were to look in the box or not?
Absolutely.
And what were those instructions?
I was told not to look in the box.
And when you violated those instructions and looked in the box, you said you saw that there were letters.
Yes, that's correct.
Did you read those letters?
Yes, I did.
Can you tell us what was in those letters?
Objection, hearsay.
Your Honor, they've opened up this area.
Well, the contents of the letters have not been gone into by the prosecution. So the objection is sustained if you're offering up for the truth of what was contained in those letters.
I'm asking about his memory, Your Honor, what he remembers about what was in those letters, how detailed his memory is.
Objection is sustained.
How many letters did you read?
My recollection is there was one letter and one, I remember, like a Father's Day card. Okay. Something along, it was a greeting card, I should say.
Okay, and did these appear to be very personal family
Yes.
letters?
What was your answer?
Yes.
Mr. Stevens, you indicated that you first met Lyle in spring of 1989.
It was the spring of my freshman year.
Is that 1989?
Yes. Yes.
And
I
you
believe so.
graduated in June of 1988 from high school?
Yes.
What high school?
It was the Westminster School in Simsbury, Connecticut.
And when you first met Lyle, did you spend a lot of time with him?
Not in the first couple weeks. I met him, and then I met him again, and then I met him again, and eventually we began spending a lot of time together.
When did you begin spending a lot of time together?
Probably by March and April of that spring.
And in May of 89 was the end of the school year, or early June?
Yeah, the last week of May, first week of June, usually.
Now, you were a member of this group of friends, Hayden, Greg Guest, Donovan, yourself, and Lyle.
Yes,
is that
that's correct.
And is it fair to say that Lyle spent the majority of his time with Donovan?
In the beginning, yes, that's fair to say, but Donovan was also asked to leave the room. And once Donovan was gone, he spent more time with us than previously.
Right. And Donovan was asked to leave in May of 89?
I believe so, early May.
And you have described yourself as one of the primary people who was encouraging Lyle to have Donovan move out. Is that correct?
Yes.
And when you had this discussion with Lyle about having Donovan move out, did you supply information to Lyle to try to convince him to have Donovan move out?
Absolutely.
And was Lyle reluctant to have Donovan move out?
Yes.
Wait until she finishes before you answer.
And was this because of his close friendship or feeling of loyalty to Donovan? Is that what it appeared to be?
I was under that impression, yes.
And were you aware that Lyle had invited Donovan to come to Beverly Hills for the summer, to spend the summer with him and his family?
No, I don't remember that.
Okay.
Lyle had invited myself for that summer.
And then was that invitation withdrawn?
Yes, over the summer he called in the telephone conversation.
Were you disappointed by that?
Yes.
Okay. Now, how many times have you been interviewed by reporters, television reporters, print, newspaper, magazine reporters, radio reporters, reporters of any stripe?
Many times.
What's many times? More than 10?
I would be guessing if I could answer that question. I don't know if it was more than 10.
Well, can you tell us whom you've been interviewed by?
Yes, I was interviewed by the LA Times reporters John Johnson and Ron Sobel early on in this.
How many times did you talk to them?
Once, I believe, or twice. Once on the telephone and once in person.
Okay. And who else?
I spoke to Bob Rand.
How many times?
Many times over the period of this entire case.
What's many times? More than 5? More than 10?
With him, it's more than 5, definitely.
Is that in person and then in addition to
In
phone
person
calls?
and on the telephone.
And who else did you speak to in terms of reporters?
I did an interview for NBC that I believe Bob Rand was the interviewer in one case, and there was another woman that was an interviewer in another case, and I did an interview for another television station also.
And what was the other television station?
I don't remember whether it was ABC or CBS. It was one of the two networks.
And have you been interviewed by anybody else of the reporter type?
It's difficult to recall right now. There were a lot of them. I don't remember.
Would it be fair to say that you've probably talked to reporters somewhere between 15 and 20 times on this case?
It would probably be fair to say that.
And how many times have you talked to the police on this case?
Also several times.
Several times?
Yeah.
Would you say it's in excess of 20?
I don't know if it's 20 separate occasions, probably with the grand jury indictment and telephone conversations. Yes.
Okay. And have you formed a sort of a friendship with Detective Zoller?
Yes, that would be fair to say.
Okay. And when you're out here, as you were last August for the grand jury or now, do you see him in the evenings sometimes?
Yes, I did at the grand jury indictment, yes.
Okay. And what type of evening entertainment did you?
We went out for a few drinks and he showed us around LA.
Where did he take you?
Well, I don't know the town well, but like around the Sunset Strip and things like that.
And how long, when you went for the drinks, was this in a restaurant or what type of place was it in?
There were a few places. I know what you're getting at.
Well, why don't you just tell me then?
Yeah, it was on one occasion there was a go-go bar that we went into.
Was this a topless bar?
Yes.
And how many other bars did you go into with Detective Zoller?
Probably 2 or 3 at most.
And who was with you and Detective Zoller when you went in this topless bar?
The bodyguard, Richard Wenskowski.
Thank you. Have you been requested by the defense to be interviewed by us?
Yes.
Have you refused?
Yes.
Always?
Yes.
We've made
until
notice.
yesterday or the day before, whenever.
Which was in the presence of the district attorneys and Mr. Zoller for about 20 minutes?
Yes.
Now, in one of those television interviews, do you remember saying that Lyle Menendez was your best friend?
I probably said that.
Okay. And do you remember saying in that television interview that you saw him every day for 6 months before the homicides and every day for 7 months afterwards?
I may have said that also.
Was that a lie?
I don't think it was a lie. I mean, every day, may have been a bit of an exaggeration, but I didn't deliberately lie.
When did school end in 1989?
Like I said, the first week of June, I believe.
And did you see Lyle Menendez after school ended until the memorial service for his parents?
He didn't, I don't believe he went back.
Just answer the question, Mr. Stevens. Did you see him for the remainder of June?
Yes, I
Where?
think I did. He didn't leave, once school ended, he didn't leave right away.
Okay, once he left Princeton, did you see him again until the
don't think so.
memorial service?
I don't think so.
So there was at least part of June? Yes?
Yes,
There was all of July,
yes,
and there was virtually all of August because the memorial service was the very end of August. Is that correct?
yes.
Now, so when you said you saw him every day, that difference to you is just a slight exaggeration? Yes or no?
It doesn't appear so now, no.
It appears to be a lie, doesn't it?
No.
It's not a lie.
No, I didn't deliberately lie. And when you're saying things to reporters, I just said, yeah, I knew him for 6 months before and for 6 months after the murders, and I saw him on a daily basis. You know, it wasn't a lie. I didn't deliberately lie to anybody.
You reviewed all of the police reports in this case prior to testifying before the grand jury, did you not?
What do you mean by the police reports?
The reports that the Detective Zoller wrote up in this case. Do you remember, right before the grand jury, reviewing the police reports and telling Detective Zoller that they were amazingly accurate? Does that sound familiar to you?
I reviewed notes of his interviews with me. And I remember vaguely saying something like that.
Something like they're amazingly accurate?
About my interview, yes.
And do you remember in one of those police reports telling Detective Zoller that you had lied in the primetime interview, the primetime interview being the television show interview?
I don't recall that. Perhaps you can refresh my memory.
Your Honor, I'm going to direct his attention to the interview of May 7th, 1989.
Would you want to show it to me?
I will, Your Honor. May 7th? 89. Oh, no, I'm sorry, this can't be right.
Right.
Must be 90. If I can have just a minute, Your Honor. There are a number of reports here. When you were given reports to review, were they both typewritten and handwritten?
I don't recall.
Mr. Stevens, direct your attention to the notes here, which appear to be in Detective Zoller's handwriting. And I'd ask you to just read as Z for Zoller, G for Glenn. I ask you to read this paragraph here.
Read to himself?
Yes, just to see if it refreshes his record.
I've read it.
Okay.
It's sort of difficult to, it's not in complete sentences. I don't.
Detective Zoller. Do you remember having that conversation with Detective Zoller about your interview on prime time?
I'd be lying if I said that I remember it now. I've seen what you have there, but I don't exactly recall discussing that primetime live interview with him.
Well, let me ask you then. Did you intentionally lie in the primetime interview?
I don't remember the extent of the primetime interview. I don't remember what was discussed in it. I haven't seen it since I did it. Well, except for when it was originally aired.
Okay, but so you don't remember what you said on prime time, and you do not remember having a conversation with Detective Zoller in which you said you were, quote, less than candid on prime time.
That less than candid statement sounds familiar to me.
But if you did tell them that you saw Mr. Menendez every day up to the death of his parents for the preceding 6 months, and every day after that, that would in fact be a lie. Is that correct?
It's not accurate.
Thank you. Now, I believe that you've testified that Lyle Menendez didn't have much spending money. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And we're talking about before his parents died.
Yes, that's correct.
So he was not able to buy the things that he wanted. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And did he have credit cards?
Yes, I believe he had some credit cards.
Have you ever seen him use his credit cards?
For the deaths of the parents, not that I recall.
Did you and Lyle have something in common because of where you had both lived earlier in your life?
Yes, that had come up at one point in our friendship. We realized that he had lived in an adjacent town to my hometown for a period of years.
And what was the name of the town he had lived in?
Muncie, New York.
And did he buy a dog?
Yes, he did.
And what did he name the dog?
Muncie.
And were you with him when he bought the dog?
I believe so.
Do you remember where it was he bought the dog?
There was a puppy farm on Route 1 near the university in Princeton.
J.P. O'Neill Kennels, does that sound familiar?
That does sound familiar, yes.
And you were with him when he bought the dog?
I believe so.
And how did he pay for it?
I don't recall.
Your Honor, for the purpose of refreshing his recollection, I would like to show him a document which the prosecution has that came from their discovery, which appears to be a Citibank credit card bill in which J.P. O'Neill Kennels appears as a church. And counsel, will you stipulate that this is a?
Are they marking it?
Yeah, I'm gonna mark it. This is.
May we
You wanna
approach,
do it
please?
out of the presence?
Yeah.
I'll just show him. from
Yeah,
right
that's
now.
fine.
If I can, I'd like to mark it and then we can discuss.
Yeah,
this.
all right, it'll be marked exhibit 58. That's 58.
Okay.
Yes.
Mr. Stevens, what's showing what's now been marked as Exhibit 58. Do you recognize just from format what this is?
It looks like a credit card statement.
And is there an entry on here that says J.P. O'Neill Kennels?
Yes, there is.
And is there a price?
$185.50, I believe.
And is there a date?
That one down from there. Is that 5-1?
Microphone.
Is that 5-1, it looks like?
Okay. As in May?
May 1st, I believe, yeah.
And what's the date of the statement?
May 24th, 1989.
And what is the name on the credit card holder?
Joseph L. Menendez.
And does this appear to be a credit card transaction which would match up with the purchase of the dog Muncie?
Yes, correct.
And did you two sort of share that dog?
That would be fair to say.
And there are a number of other credit card entries for this month, is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
You remember being with him when he bought a Movado watch before his parents died?
That sounds vaguely familiar. I had forgotten about that.
Okay. And do you remember him losing that watch and then having to buy another one to replace it?
Again, that sounds vaguely familiar as you're telling me this. I'd forgotten.
Do you remember him buying a belt for you from Adam Ross?
Yes, that's correct. Without my knowledge, he surprised me with it in the car after we walked out of the mall on one occasion.
And was that because you had admired that belt?
Yes, I had expressed an interest in buying that belt.
And it was a $200 belt, wasn't it?
I believe it was about $125.
And you couldn't afford it, could you?
Not at the time, no.
And Lyle bought it for you?
Yes, that's correct.
you want to establish a time frame when those events occurred?
I'm sorry, this was prior to the parents' death, is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And you mentioned that Lyle complained about his Alfa Romeo.
Yes.
Was there something wrong with it?
Well, when I went out to visit him after the parents' deaths in Marina Del Rey around Christmas time, I don't believe the car was running correctly.
That he had problems with it running?
Yes, I believe so.
And he let you wear one of the Rolex watches, is that correct?
Yes, for the week out in California is when I think he started that practice.
Which week out in
The
California?
week of the arrest.
So this was in March,
Yes.
and it's your testimony you never wore the watch before that time?
Excuse me?
Is it your testimony that you never wore one of the Rolex watches before that week in March?
No, that's not I might have, but it started on a regular basis. You wear one watch and I'll wear the other one so I don't lose it.
Okay, but before that week, you wore it sometimes, didn't you?
That could be, yes.
Could be, or is?
I don't recall specifically.
Where's that watch now?
I have no idea.
Did you sell it?
Yes, I did.
Who did you sell it to?
I sold it to a neighbor of my father's who's a jeweler after the arrests.
Okay. And the $1,400 that Lyle gave you on the plane, he said when he was concerned about being arrested, what happened to the $1,400?
We used it to finance our trip back across the country.
We being whom?
Myself, Hayden Rogers, and there was a friend by the name of Cole Kruger who had met us out in California and came back with us to the East Coast.
Now, from the time that Lyle's parents were arrested, his parents died until the time Lyle was arrested, you spent a great deal of time with him, is that correct?
That is correct.
And did you stay in hotel rooms?
In the Princeton area, I spent the night at a hotel with him on one or two occasions, I think.
And who paid for the hotel room?
He was staying there, Lyle did.
And did you eat meals with him?
Yes,
And who paid for the meals?
I believe Lyle did.
And how many plane trips did you take with him?
I believe just the one, the week of the arrest.
And who paid for that plane trip?
Lyle did.
And when you flew out at Christmas time, who paid for that plane trip?
Lyle did.
Have you talked to people about being able to make some money off of this case in terms of writing a book or making a movie?
It has been discussed before.
And who have you discussed this with?
Robert Rand had suggested something after the case was all over.
And did you talk to Eric Tam about this also?
I don't know Eric Tam very well.
Do you know who Eric Tam is?
He was a friend of Lyle's that lived in Princeton, I believe.
Have you ever spoken to Eric Tam?
I met him once or twice.
And when you met him, you asked him for information about the family and about the defense, didn't you?
I don't recall.
And do you recall, well, let me go back. Now, getting back to the incident with Donovan Goodreau, you said that you and Hayden and Greg sat there and talked to Lyle about why he should throw Donovan out of the room.
Yes.
Is that correct?
That's correct.
And he was very reluctant to do that. Is that correct?
Yes.
And you thought this was absolutely the right thing to do. Is that correct?
Yes.
And you kept pressure on him to get rid of Donovan. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. And do you know if the morning that Donovan was thrown out of the room, there were phone calls from both Lyle's father and mother with regard to this subject?
I don't recall if it was on the morning of when Donovan was thrown out, but I do remember listening in on a phone call between Lyle and his father and mother. They were in an automobile somewhere calling from the car phone and speaking to him about that, as well as the model girlfriend.
Christy?
Yes.
And they were telling him to get rid of both of them?
I remember specifically them saying to get rid of the model girlfriend, and the father had said something about with the Donovan thing to just cut his losses.
And get rid of Donovan.
That was my impression.
And did you have the feeling this was something that Lyle was very reluctant to do?
Objection calls for speculation.
Sustained.
I think there's been testimony about what Lyle said about it. I'm sorry. Did Lyle say anything? I apologize, Your Honor. Did Lyle say anything about not wanting to get rid of Donovan?
I don't recall if Lyle said anything.
How did he appear on the day that you all helped Donovan leave?
He appeared nervous, edgy.
Appear upset?
Yes, that's fair to say.
Did he appear sad?
Yes, that's fair to say.
And when he told Donovan he was going to have to leave, who helped to move Donovan's stuff out?
I believe Hayden did most of the moving out. The truck pulled up next to the window of the dorm room. They were about on the same level, and I believe Hayden was going in and out the window, loading the stuff into the truck.
Who brought the truck back?
I don't recall who went and drove the truck around. I don't recall.
Was Lyle in the room when Hayden was moving the stuff out?
It's possible, but I can't say for certain.
Okay. And were there a number of Donovan's things that were left in the room?
The only thing that I know of specifically is the wallet.
And where was that wallet from the time Donovan left until you moved out, or Lyle moved out in June?
I don't know.
Mr. Stevens, when did you first tell the police, if you remember, that Lyle had stolen the wallet?
The first time I remember discussing it was with Detective Zoller on the telephone. I believe it was the day after one of the television shows had released that the guns were purchased with Donovan's license.
Now, if I told you that that show aired on May 17th, would it be fair to say that your conversation took place on May 18th?
Most likely.
Now, after Lyle's parents died and you went to the memorial service and started spending time with Lyle, did you feel that you were close to him at that time?
Yes, that's fair to say.
And is this also a period of time in which you considered yourself his best friend?
He was my closest friend at the time, I would say so.
Okay. And you had warm feelings toward him and cared about him as a friend?
Very much so.
And you felt loyal toward him?
Very much so.
And he was spending a lot of time with you and seeking your advice, is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And he was asking your advice on cars and condominiums and businesses and stuff like that, is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
How old were you at the time?
This is, what's the year again?
89.
89, I was approximately 20.
And did you have any particular experience in real estate at that time?
No.
Did you have any experience in restaurants?
No.
Did you know anything in particular about cars?
No.
And yet he was looking to you for advice and trusting you as a confidant. Is that true?
Yes, that's correct.
And this is a time when you say you were very close to him. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And that would have been starting in early September of 89.
I believe so.
Do you remember in September of 89, September 18th of 89 in particular, 2 to 3 weeks into this close friendship, telling Detective Zoller that Lyle was arrogant and condescending and spending money in an offensive way?
I don't recall that specifically, but I might have said it.
Would it refresh your recollection to look at the police report?
Yes, it would.
Quoting you? May I approach, Your Honor?
Yes.
This is the September 18th, 1989.
Do you remember seeing this police report before?
It looks like the police report that I was given prior to the grand jury testimony.
And the police report that you commented at the time was extremely accurate.
Yes.
And directing your attention to the second paragraph.
Mhm.
Does that indicate that you told
Let me
Detective?
read it. Okay.
So by September 18th, 1989, you were already telling the police extremely negative things about Lyle Menendez. Isn't that correct?
Yes, that's correct. He hadn't been treating me very, very well at the time.
You know, the memorial service was the very end of September. Of August.
Yes.
This is 3 weeks later.
Yes.
You've just told us that this was a period in which you were close and friendly and trusting, and he was trusting you. And yet you say he
Yeah,
wasn't.
I felt very close to him. I considered him my best friend, but after the murders, he changed.
Well, you hadn't seen him for 3 months before the murders.
That's correct.
You've just told us here on the stand that this period following the murders was a period in which you were very close.
That's correct.
You were spending every day with him.
That's correct.
He was paying expenses for you.
That's,
He was asking your advice.
yes.
And yet in this period of time, you say he wasn't treating you very well.
He was being condescending towards me on several occasions.
And that made you angry, didn't it?
Oh, yes. That's fair to say.
And on October 24th, 1989, you tell the police, first, that you had lied to the reporters in giving your interviews, and secondly, that Lyle had offered you a job.
Excuse me, Your Honor, that mischaracterizes the testimony of the first part.
I'm sorry, you.
Rephrase the question.
Okay. On October 24th, 1989, you spoke with Detective Zoller with regard to an interview you'd given to John Johnson.
Okay.
You remember that?
I don't specifically recall the interview with, the discussion with Detective Zoller.
Would it refresh your recollection to look at the report?
Yes, it would.
Did you read the second and third paragraph to yourself?
Mm-hmm. Yes, okay.
Have you read that?
Yes, I have.
Yeah, does that report refresh your recollection as to this conversation?
With John Johnson?
With Detective Zoller?
Yes.
And are you telling Detective Zoller that you're concerned that some of the negative statements that you've made to Mr. Johnson have been printed and this may affect the way Lyle feels about you?
Yes, that's correct.
And do you tell Detective Zoller that what you're going to do is just tell Lyle that the statements are out of context and that Mr. Johnson misquoted you?
Yes, that's correct.
And in this same conversation with Detective Zoller in October of '89, you tell him that Lyle has offered you a job Is that correct?
Is this here? Or is that? That's the fourth. It says here, and I recall that it says Lyle further asked him to drop out of school and go into business with him. So that's what I spoke to him about, and I do recall him offering me a job.
And what was he offering you?
It's just $50,000 a year in here.
And I'd move to strike if he has no independent recollection.
Does that refresh?
Objection.
Thank you. Does that refresh your recollection as to what the nature of the job was that Lyle had offered you?
I don't remember being offered $50,000 a year, but like I said, these are extremely accurate notes. So it's possible that sum was kicked about.
But that's what you told Detective Zoller.
Yes, it appears so.
So we're now in October of '89, and are you still consider yourself Lyle's best friend?
Well, friendship transcends a lot of things, but homicide's not one of them, so no.
Well, did you believe at the time he'd killed his parents?
I wasn't sure. There were times that I thought maybe, there were times that I thought maybe not.
Well, Mr. Stevens, I'm a little confused. You've told us that you were his best friend from the time from the time that you went to this memorial service, at least until he was arrested. You were his best friend, his confidant, his business partner, traveled with him, saw him on a daily basis.
Yes.
And it is clear that what you are doing is reporting to the police on a regular basis anything negative you have to say about him. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Now, is that your definition of friendship?
The reason I felt it was my duty.
Yes or no? Is that your definition of friendship?
No.
On October 24th, you place a call to the police department, to Detective Zoller.
Excuse me, what was the date?
October 24th, 1989. The article is published by the Los Angeles Times. And Eric makes some sort of has a reaction to this. Is this correct?
Eric called me and had a reaction to a phone call from Detective Zoller.
About the article?
About an article that was to be published.
Okay. And so you then called Detective Zoller and told him what Eric's reaction had been. Is that correct?
I think so. That's possible.
Okay. And is that because you thought that Eric's reaction was incriminating?
It was suspicious.
And on May 17th, 1990, you see on television that Donovan Goodreau's license was used to purchase shotguns. Is that correct?
Correct.
And so on May 18th, 1990, you called Detective Zoller, whom you've talked to probably 6 or 8 times by now. Is that fair to say?
It's probable.
And you tell him for the first time this story about Lyle stealing the wallet. Is that correct?
Yes.
Do you remember telling him also in that interview that that wallet sat in that room all year long?
Yes.
Do you remember May 17th, 1990, giving some information to Detective Zoller and saying, essentially, I wanted to tell you because this may make the difference between a conviction and them getting off?
That sounds familiar.
Have you been watching this show on Courtroom TV?
Yes.
I mean, this show, this trial.
While I was still on the East Coast. While I was still on the East Coast, yes.
Okay. How much of this trial have you seen?
A fair amount.
What's a fair amount?
I don't know. I watched, when I was on the East Coast, I watched it when I was in my room.
Did you watch it every day?
I watched portions of it every day, yes.
Lyle brought you in to help him work on the restaurant business, is that correct?
That was not the original intent, I don't think, but ended up to be so. the case. I ended up working in the restaurant. I believe Hayden was brought back originally to do the restaurant thing, and I was supposed to help him look at real estate properties.
And were you being paid to help him look at real estate properties?
Once I left school in February, yes.
And
just for that, there was only a short time from, I left school in the second or third week of February. Lyle was arrested in the first week of March. I don't recall if I got a paycheck in that 3-week time or not, but I understood myself to be in his employment.
All right, how much longer do you think your examination will be?
Probably about 15 or 20 minutes.
Okay, well, let's take a recess at this time, ladies and gentlemen. We'll resume at 10 minutes after 11. Don't discuss this case with anyone. Don't discuss it among yourselves or with anyone else. Don't form any opinions about it. We'll resume at 10 minutes after 11. I'll ask that counsel be here at 11 o'clock so we can discuss some other matters with you.
Audience, stay seated until the jury.
With the witness here.
Could we ask the witness to remain for a minute, Your Honor?
Yes, witness remain here and be here at 11 o'clock.
Yes, sir.
All right, counsel, you can look at this transcript here.
Thank you. I'd like the court to remain for a minute, if you will.
Sure. All right, the jurors have left. Ms. Hanson?
Yes, Your Honor.
No, we're going to discuss that issue at 11 o'clock. I just want to know, you have something else?
Yes, I did, Your Honor. I would like this witness to be admonished at this point, since he's in the middle of his testimony, to not discuss his testimony or anything about this case with the district attorney or the police in the break.
Well, I won't do that. I think they have a right to consult with the witness while he's testifying, and that request is denied. All right, we'll be in recess until 11 o'clock.
May I be excused?
Come back at 11.
Okay.
All right, there was a matter that counsel wished to pursue in regards to a visit to some individuals regarding potential danger to the defendant. Did you wish to pursue that? And is people's position still that it's not within the scope of the direct examination?
No, that's not my position. My position is its prejudicial effect outweighs its probative value.
All right, if you want to inquire of the witness, you can do that now, and we'll hear what it is that you're trying to elicit.
Mr. Stevens, did Lyle Menendez express to you some concerns with regard to his safety?
Yes, he did.
And did he identify people or groups of whom he was afraid?
Pardon me, I judge his vaguest time. What time period?
We're talking about after the parent's death.
I don't think specifically he thought he ever told me whoever killed his parents.
Do you remember testifying yesterday that he expressed a fear of the mafia?
I don't know that through direct conversations with Lyle. I don't think if it was the mafia. I just, Richie had mentioned something about the mafia.
Your Honor, we gave back the transcript. I'm sorry, I was wondering if I might read it to him and refresh his recollection as to what he said yesterday.
Yes. Who is Richie?
Richard Wenskowski, the bodyguard.
Mr. Stevens, and I'm reading you from yesterday's transcript on page 68, starting at line 10. Question to Mrs. Bozanich of you was, did Lyle ever say anything to you about why he wanted bodyguards? Your answer was, well, there was the whole idea that maybe the mafia had been responsible for this murder, and that I understood that he was fearing for his own person. Do you remember saying that?
Yes, that's exactly correct.
So he thought that the mafia had been responsible for the murder, and therefore he was afraid of the mafia.
Yes.
Is that correct?
He thought possibly the mafia was responsible. If it was the mafia that was responsible, then therefore that was who he was to be afraid of.
And he expressed to you that possibly the mafia was responsible. Is that correct?
Yes.
Now, had you told Lyle Menendez, as well as other people, that your family had some mafia connections?
Yes, that's fair to say.
And
wait, okay, let's make sure we don't have any jurors come in. Okay, thank you.
With whom in the mafia was your family connected?
My grandfather on my father's side, a long time ago, I guess approximately 35 or more years ago, was friends with a man by the name of Anthony Salerno.
And is Anthony Salerno somebody who's also known as Fat Tony Salerno?
I believe so.
And who is he?
He,
Object is calling for hearsay.
Just as to this witness's state of mind and what might have been communicated to the defendant. Yes. Go ahead. Who do you understand that person to have been? Is he still alive?
no, actually, he died in prison last year.
Okay. And who is it that you understood that person to be?
Well, not at the time. At the time of his death in prison, he was reputed as being the head of the Genovese crime family.
And who's the Genovese crime family?
A New York Cosa Nostra organization, I assume.
Okay. And so you had told Lyle, as well as others, about this connection in your family. Is that correct?
Yes, it was mentioned on occasion.
And did you have occasion to take him to New York to meet someone?
Yes, we went to New York together to meet somebody on an unrelated matter, yes.
And was that meeting connected with his fear for his personal safety?
Yes.
And was the meeting with someone whom you knew? Or
Yes.
was it someone that Lyle knew?
Someone that I knew.
And someone you were introducing Lyle to?
Correct.
And what was that man's name?
The man's name was Anthony Negri.
And did you tell Lyle that Anthony Negri was also connected to the mafia?
I don't believe I had any knowledge of that at the time.
And what was the purpose of this meeting with Anthony Negri?
Mr. Negri owned a security company in New York City. Lyle was looking for a full-time bodyguard, and he thought that he should get Hayden a handgun permit. So I suggested that we go see this gentleman, since he owned a security company, that perhaps we could get Hayden a legal handgun permit to carry.
Now, he owned a security company in New York?
In New York City, yes.
And you were all living at the time in New Jersey? Is that correct?
When was the date? Well, I assume that's true. I've always lived in New Jersey since I've been at Princeton.
Okay. So you were going to see this man in New York to get a gun permit for Hayden to carry in New Jersey? Is that your testimony?
We wanted to ask him how we go about getting a handgun permit.
And it's your testimony here that you never indicated to Lyle Menendez that this man had any connections to the mafia?
I don't recall that I had any knowledge of that at that time.
Do you have knowledge of that now?
Not any concrete knowledge, no.
Do you have reason to believe that it may be true?
Only through things that Lyle has told me about meeting this gentleman. Apparently, there was a portion of the meeting where I was not in the room, and Lyle told me that this gentleman said some things to him that led him to believe that he was connected.
Are you nervous about saying in open court that somebody who's alive now is connected to the mafia?
Well, I'm nervous discussing the whole subject, to be honest.
The whole mafia subject?
Yes.
Because you think if you name names of people who are connected to the mafia, you may get in trouble?
No, it's just I don't want to implicate somebody that I have no knowledge of really being involved.
But you've heard that he is?
Well, he's indicated that he heard it from your client.
Yes,
so.
that's correct.
Did you hear from any other sources that may be true?
No, not that I recall.
Was Hayden present at the meeting?
I don't think so. I don't recall.
But this was a gun permit for Hayden?
We went to originally ask for a gun permit for Hayden, and Mr. Negri immediately told us that he was probably too young. I think I recall that. And so then Lyle started asking about for me, and then also possibly for himself, a handgun permit.
Who else went to this meeting?
I have a recollection of maybe somebody else being there, but I don't recall who.
Did you get there in a limo?
I don't recall how we got there.
Do you remember if there were bodyguards with you?
I don't think there were.
Okay. I have nothing further with this witness.
All right. Did you have any examination of the witness on that subject?
Yes, Your Honor. This person you indicated as Anthony Salerno, did you ever take Lyle Menendez to see him?
No.
Okay, when's the last time you saw Mr. Salerno, if at all?
I've never met Mr. Salerno.
You just heard about his legend?
That's correct. I've seen pictures of him with my grandfather.
All right, and then there's no connection, well, is there any connection between Mr. Salerno and Mr. Negri, to your knowledge?
No,
Okay, how's it you know Mr. Negri?
he was my father's business partner for a while, years ago.
The name Salerno, is that a family name of yours?
No.
What is your family's name?
Well, my last name now is Stevens, but it had been changed just prior to my birth.
And what was the name before?
Stevelman, Stevelman. Elman.
And you're not Italian?
No.
Are you Jewish?
Half Jewish, half German.
So you never took Lyle Menendez to see Mr. Salerno. I take it at the time was in prison? In 1989?
I don't recall when he was originally indicted.
Do you consider yourself to be an expert in organized crime?
No.
Have you ever taken any Department of Justice organized crime courses or FBI courses or anything like that?
No.
All right, we don't have to go into that aspect of it. It's just what he communicated to the defendant. That's the issue.
Now, I believe you indicated that you learned some things from Lyle Menendez at the conclusion of your meeting with Mr. Negri. Is that correct?
Yes.
And what kind of things did you learn from Lyle Menendez?
There was just one little incident. He told me that while I was in the bathroom, that Mr. Negri had told him, "I think I know who was responsible for your parents' death, and you have nothing to worry about. I'll put out the word that you're to be left alone."
Now, when you went to this meeting with Mr. Negri, did Mr. Menendez ever indicate to you that he wanted to meet with someone in order to put off the mafia? In other words, to try to make peace with them or something like that?
I don't recall that was any motive for our trip to see Mr. Negri, no. I thought it was just for the handgun. I'm trying to recollect, but I think it was just for the handgun permit.
Was that your only meeting with Mr. Negri?
It was my only meeting with Mr. Negri. I later learned that Lyle went back and saw him again later without my knowledge.
Okay, how do you know that Lyle went to see him again?
He went with a friend of mine by the name of Ted Remick, who has told me such.
Right, but you don't have any direct knowledge from Lyle Menendez, is that correct?
That's correct.
May I have one, please?
Yes.
I have nothing further.
All right. Did you wish to briefly argue the matter? My inclination is to permit this area of inquiry since it does relate to the areas covered by the prosecution on its direct examination and would be relevant, and I don't find it to be prejudicial or unduly time consuming. Did you wish to argue the matter further?
I don't think so.
All right, then if you want to proceed with that, the defense may do that. All right, I don't know if we have all our jurors back yet. There's some outside. Okay, let's let them come in first so we can take a count and make sure we have everybody. Yes, well, wait till we let the jurors come in. All right, counsel had something else?
Actually, two things. I just wanted to make a point that I forgot to make, that it seems that the information about Mr. Salerno is irrelevant to these proceedings, that the information about Mr. Negri, which is what should be at issue, not whether or not his grandfather had a friend who's never met named Tony Salerno.
Yeah, I think it can be edited down to what occurred, and without going into family histories that really don't have any bearing on
Have
this.
you heard on that?
Yes.
It's our position that Mr. Stevens has talked openly about his family connections with the mafia, that main connection being, or the one he talks about, is with Mr. Salerno.
When you say talked openly, you mean with your client?
With my client, he has with other people.
Okay, well, if you bring that out, then it would certainly be relevant if that's how it came out.
Okay.
Yeah.
The second thing is, I think there's some clarification we need about the exhibits. Some of these exhibits are being shown to us for the first time when they're being passed to the witnesses. Now, I'm not talking about police reports to refresh recollection, but items which are marked and then going to be exhibits. And my understanding is that we were to be shown those in advance. Ms. Lansing's understanding is no, if they're impeaching, that they don't have to show them to us. So I just wanted some clarification.
Well, number one, it's my understanding that what she has shown the witness in regards to a business record was something that you had obtained from, or that they had obtained from you. So it wasn't as though you weren't aware of it.
Well, but Your Honor, there's several thousands of pages discovering this case, and my concern is that if we don't know in advance, I don't have everything at my fingertips. I don't have all.
Yeah, Well, I don't think that it's necessary for counsel to tip their hand to the point of giving you, prior to the examination of the witness, those objects that they're going to use to cross-examine a witness about. But clearly before it's shown to the witness or mentioned to the jury, it should be shown to you so that you could at least look at it and make any objections known. But clearly it wouldn't be appropriate for the court to require that each time counsel asks a question of a witness, that prior to that, the counsel has shown the exhibits to opposing counsel and given counsel a chance to speak with the witness about them. That would eliminate the effective cross-examination.
Well, Your Honor, would that be true then for the people in their cross-examination of defense witnesses?
Yes, as long as you're not pulling things out of the hat that neither side is aware of, or that if that is happening, then if it's not been the subject of previous discovery, then that might be a separate issue. But we can discuss that later. I don't see that that's happening at this moment. But if you want to discuss it further, we certainly can.
Okay.
All right, anything else, Sal?
No.
Okay, then let's proceed. We'll have the jury come out. All right, everyone is present. The jurors are all present. In the case of People versus Lyle Menendez, you may continue your cross-examination.
Thank you, Your Honor. Mr. Stevens, you indicated that in the conversation surrounding the eviction of Donovan from Lyle's room, there was some discussion about Donovan had borrowed some money from Lyle.
No, Lyle had some money missing, and we had thought maybe Donovan was responsible for that.
And you think it's about $150? Is that what you said?
That's a vague recollection. That number seems to be familiar to me.
Okay, so that was money that was just sitting in the room, and it was in an area that Donovan would have had access to?
I don't know.
Did you know him to loan money to people?
Question vague as to who.
I'm sorry, did you know Lyle Menendez to loan money to people?
I don't know if I have any specific knowledge of any loans that he's made. I don't recall.
Now, at some point, you began working for the restaurant. Is that correct?
Yes.
And you were involved in Lyle's purchase of that restaurant, or you were aware when
I was present at the purchase, yes.
And were you aware when the meetings were held with Lyle and his uncle Carlos and Steve Goldberg, who was a lawyer?
Repeat the question, please?
Are you aware that before Lyle bought that restaurant, there were a great number of meetings with Carlos Baralt, his uncle, and with a lawyer named Steve Goldberg?
Objection, lack of foundation as to personal knowledge.
I'm asking if he's aware.
Well, again, depending on how he knew about it, it could still be hearsay. So let's go at it one step at a time.
Okay.
Was he present, or did the defendant
All right.
tell him about that?
All right. Were you present at any meetings between Lyle and his uncle, Lyle and Steve Goldberg, or all three with regard to the purchase of the restaurant?
I was present at meetings with Lyle and his uncle Carlos about the purchase of the restaurant. I don't remember meeting Steve Goldberg that far back.
Okay. And how many meetings were you present at?
I don't recall.
More than 2?
It's possible.
More than 3?
It's also possible.
And did it appear that his uncle Carlos was going to have the ability to either make this happen or stop it?
Well, Lyle was taking his uncle's advice very seriously about whether or not to purchase the restaurant. You mean his ability to make it happen?
Well, did he need his uncle's consent?
Yeah, I believe his uncle was the executor of the will. So I guess he was in charge of the estate and the money that was necessary for this. I'm not sure if the insurance money was enough to cover the purchase of the restaurant.
But it seemed that Uncle Carlos was going to have a decision-making role in this. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. And were you there during the times that Uncle Carlos was making statements to that effect, that he had to be convinced this was the right idea?
I believe so.
And you told us that you went with Lyle when he made offers on 2 different condominiums. Is that correct?
I was with Lyle for paperwork regarding 2 condominiums and a patio home. If you're referring to offers, I don't.
2 condominium, I believe the district attorney has given you paperwork on 1 condominium and 1 patio home.
That's, she showed me, yes, that's correct.
Now, there was a 3rd condominium as well, is that right?
I believe so, yes.
And is that the one that Lyle's parents were buying for him at the time that they died?
Yes, I believe it was in Stewart's Watch or something like that, or
Canal Point? Does that sound familiar?
Well, Canal Point is the one that they showed me. There was also the apartment in Stewart's Watch. I don't know if that was involved prior. My recollection is vague in that area.
Let me take you back one step
Okay.
at a time. 1 condominium was actually purchased. Is that correct? Is that your knowledge?
Yes, I believe.
Time.
Overall.
I remember a telephone conversation. I didn't hear, wasn't privy to the conversation, but Terry Baralt was speaking to Lyle's father on the phone, and she got word from Lyle's father that it was okay for them to, okay for Terry to go ahead and purchase a condominium for Lyle to live at when he was going to Princeton.
Okay. Now, the other 2 that you looked at with him in Canal Point, the 2 that you have the paperwork on, he looked at them but never bought them. Is that correct?
I don't know. She said something about that they were never closed on, so.
Okay. And when was it that you went with him to look at these? Do you remember?
We went to look at them a few times after the death of the parents, I believe. We went to look at them many times. I'm really, it's difficult with the dates and the times.
Okay. Were you with him when he had discussions about who would live in the patio home?
Yes.
And was that patio home to be for himself and his brother?
I remember him discussing himself. I don't remember a mention of his brother living there, but it's possible that it was discussed.
Now, when you talk about an apartment in Stewart's Watch, did in fact Lyle get an apartment for you and Hayden
I believe,
in Stewart's Watch?
Well, originally Lyle got that apartment for himself and for Hayden. I think when he got it, I was still in school. And then by the time I left school, Lyle wasn't spending much time there, and I moved in there.
And did you pay rent there?
There was, once Lyle had been arrested, yes, but not while Lyle was around. Well, I was supposed to pay it out of the salary that he was paying me.
And did you, or did you pay it separately?
I paid it out of the salary that I was paid, I believe.
Do you know who a man named Harry Mansman is? Does that name sound familiar?
Not at all.
Did you deal with any accountants for Chuck's?
Oh, yeah, there was a CPA that I guess Uncle Carlos was trying to get somebody to deal with the books.
To audit the books?
Yes, I guess so.
While you were running the business?
I believe so. I remember an accountant.
Is it your testimony that the apartment was paid for out of your salary or out of money that the business took in?
Part of the time, I remember making payments for rent at some point when I was living in that Stewart's Watch apartment.
How long did you live in that Stewart's Watch apartment?
Probably from a while after the time of the arrests until probably around July of that same year, from March to July.
And how many times did you pay rent there? You personally, with your own money?
I really don't recall.
And was the business also paying for a car?
They paid the down payment on a car for me, yes, and I was also supposed to make, I think, the car payments out of my salary.
But the business, which was Lyle's business, paid the down payment on the car. The business or Uncle Carlos or somebody gave me money for the down payment on a car because the lease had run out on my Firebird, and part of my contract agreement with Lyle was that he pay for a car for me if I was going to leave school because my parents couldn't afford it. Okay, so he was paying for the apartment, he was paying for the car.
Yes.
He was paying for plane tickets when you traveled, hotels, meals, etc. Is that correct?
One plane ticket. I never, I spent a night in a hotel once in New Jersey just because he wanted me there. We weren't traveling around staying in hotels.
Do you remember testifying before the grand jury that he never bought you anything before or after his parents' death, and when he tried to give you things, you said no? You refused?
Prior to his parents' death, I refused often when he attempted to buy me things. Afterwards, in the course of our business things, there were things that had to be paid for that weren't my responsibility.
Like your car and your apartment?
Yes, it was part of our contract agreement.
And the only things that you remember accepting from him before is the $125 belt?
That's the only thing I recall.
But there might have been other things.
Maybe, but nothing that sticks out specifically in my mind.
So when you testified before the grand jury that he never spent any money before or after?
If you could read me back the grand jury, please.
Reading from page 151. Excuse me, let me start on page 150 at line 27. Question, did Lyle take you to the Princeton Inn or other nice places? Was it just to eat or win your friendship? Answer, are you referring to the Nassau Inn question, perhaps? I don't remember a reference to Princeton Inn, but if you were referring to prior to the Menendez murders, Lyle never had much money. So when we would go out as friends, we were responsible for our own meals or entertainment. He never paid for me for anything. Even after the murder, although Lyle had offered several times to buy me things, I wouldn't allow it.
That is accurate testimony, I believe so. And I still believe that to be true.
Okay, so the buying you things doesn't include plane tickets and cars and apartments and belts.
Once I was once I was in his employment, it was understood that that was his responsibility to pay for those things.
Okay. When did you start running his business?
I can't recall the date. There must be a record of it somewhere, but I don't recall offhand.
Well, can you get me close?
Sure. I left school in February of 90, I believe, and sometime soon thereafter.
Now, when you left school, can you get a leave from Princeton just by saying, I'm tired of the school and I want a little break, or did you have to give them a different reason?
I believe you can just say I'd like to take a year's leave of absence.
And what did you tell them?
I told them, I don't recall what I...
Irrelevant.
Overall.
I don't recall what I told them why I wanted to take.
Do you remember telling them that you had psychological reasons for wanting time off?
I remember at the time I was going through problems with depression, yes.
And so you told them that you wanted the time off for that reason, is that correct?
Yes.
And you didn't tell them you wanted the time off to run Lyle's business, is that correct?
That's correct.
So you lied to them, is that correct?
No, I took the year off because I was depressed. I didn't like the school and I wanted a year off. And it was convenient that Lyle offered me a job at the time that would pay my way for that year off.
Didn't you quit school so that you could work for the business?
I was going to take a year off at the end of my sophomore year. I took it earlier. I took it halfway through the sophomore year because Lyle made me this job offer.
Okay. But you didn't tell Princeton that that was the reason you were leaving, when you were leaving, is that correct?
I don't recall mentioning that to them.
So you started running the business in February of 90. How long did you run the business?
Until approximately July of 90.
Now, how big a business was this? I mean, how many employees? How much money did it make a year?
I don't recall now. I had, I guess it grossed, I only know this from Lyle's estimates that it grossed somewhere around $700,000 a year prior to him taking it over.
Okay. And how many employees were you responsible for supervising?
There were about 5, I guess, around.
And what were your responsibilities at that restaurant?
There were things like payroll was part of my responsibility. I had a hand in a lot of things. I don't recall exactly what was my distinct responsibility. And I did a lot of the stuff with Gus Tangelos, and I don't recall exactly. Supervising the employees, being at the cash register for many hours a day, the payroll, and we also went through like cost-cutting measures and things like that. I didn't know much about the restaurant business. I was learning as I was going along.
You were only 20, right?
I believe so, yes.
And did you do the bookkeeping? Did you keep accounting records, or did somebody else do that?
I did that. Well, now that you refresh my memory, there was the accountant, and there was a woman that came in, and I was supposed to sit down with her and give her expense records and stuff. Gus Tangelos, myself, and her, and she would make the notations in an accounting book on a weekly basis that Uncle Carlos had hired her.
So you didn't do the accounting, you just gave her the paperwork?
I didn't do specific accounting. I was involved in keeping the account records.
Did you ever tell anybody that when you were running this business, it was $1 million a year business?
Yeah, it was roughly, that's what Lyle had told me, that it was grossing somewhere 700,000. It was a rough estimate. I'm sure I've said that many times.
That it's $1 million a year business?
Yeah.
And did you tell people that you were the one that kept the accounting records?
I might have said something along those lines just because of my connection with the accounting records.
But you didn't keep the records?
No, the woman had them.
Okay, so if you told people you kept the accounting records, that really wouldn't be true, would it?
It's an embellishment.
And you've told us there were 5 employees. Do you remember telling anybody that you supervised 20 restaurant employees?
The only time I can remember is saying something like that is on my resume.
Can I approach, Your Honor?
Yes. What is it?
It is a resume that says Glenn Stevens on top. Mr. Stevens, do you recognize that resume?
Yes, I do. It's my resume.
What resume is that?
That's mine. An old one, but that's mine.
And does it indicate on their work experience?
Yes, it does.
And does it indicate that you kept the accounting records for Chuck's Restaurant, which was $1 million a year business?
It says keep accounting records of businesses grossing $1 million annually.
So that was an embellishment, I think you said.
Yes, absolutely.
And you say on the resume that you supervised a payroll of 20 restaurant employees.
That is also an embellishment.
So we went from 5 to 20.
Yeah.
Is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
Is there anything else on that resume that's an embellishment?
Probably.
Such as?
I don't know specifically.
Well, let's start at the top. Princeton University. Was that true?
Yes.
The recipient of the Memorial Scholarship for Academic Excellence.
I was a recipient of an Irving Van Gilder Perrine Jr. Memorial Scholarship. It's on here, yeah. Irving, E-R-V-I-N-G, capital V-A-N, capital G-I-L-D-E-R, capital P-E-R-I-N-E, Jr. Memorial Scholarship. I was a recipient of that, yeah.
That was something you got in high school?
Actually, no. It was, I was given it upon attending Princeton.
Okay. And it says you went to Westminster School, is that correct?
Yes.
It says you were valedictorian, is that correct?
Not exactly.
Okay.
I believe I had the highest GPA in the senior class, but being that I had not been a 4-year student there, they don't allow a non-4-year student to become valedictorian, I believe.
So you wrote in your resume you were the valedictorian, but you were not.
That's correct.
And what about the recipient of the Yale Book Award? Is that true?
I really don't recall. I don't believe so. I don't believe that's true, no.
Would it refresh your recollection to see the awards page from your high school yearbook?
I can look at it, sure.
May I approach, Your Honor?
Yes.
And I'd like to mark this as Defendant 60. So that's or Exhibit 60, I apologize.
That's not it.
I have to clarify, though, I didn't write this. My girlfriend at the time wrote that.
People when you received the employment,
Yes, I did.
did you read it before you gave it to them?
Yes, I did.
Did you know you were presenting a false picture of yourself?
Yes, that's correct. I probably would have been stupid not to.
Was it stupid not to present a false picture of yourself?
When you go for jobs, we're instructed at Princeton University to embellish a little bit on the resume. I mean, you have to sell yourself.
Directing your attention to a very poor Xerox copy, but doesn't say Westminster 1988.
Yes, it does.
Is that the yearbook from your school?
I believe so. It's a supplement to that.
And does it have a page marked commencement prize list?
Yes, it does.
And does it have the Outstanding Scholar Award?
Yes, it does.
And that's not your name, is it?
No, it's not.
And does it have the Yale Book Award?
Yes, it does.
And you're not Susanna Bridget Baker by any chance?
No, I'm not.
Is she the one that won the Yale Book Award that year?
It appears so.
When you were spending time with Lyle, you told us yesterday that he was concerned for his personal safety. Is that correct?
Yes.
And you told us yesterday that the people that he was afraid of included the mafia. Is that correct?
Yes.
Now, Mr. Stevens, had you talked to Lyle Menendez and to other people about your family connection with the mafia?
Yes.
And what was that family connection?
Like I said, a gentleman by the name of Anthony Salerno was a close friend of my grandfather, and my father often referred to him in the home as Uncle Tony because that's how he was known to him.
And is he also known as Fat Tony Salerno? Is
Yes,
that
that's
name?
correct.
And who is Mr. Salerno? Or who was he?
Objection irrelevant.
Well, he was reported to be the capo or the head of the Genovese crime family.
And who's the Genovese crime family?
I believe it's a New York-based Cosa Nostra operation.
And this is the man who was referred to as Uncle Tony.
By my father, yes.
And you spoke to Lyle and to other people about this family connection. Is that correct?
Yes.
Did you have occasion to take Lyle into New York one time for a meeting with a man with regard to Lyle's safety?
Yes, that's correct.
And who was this man you met with?
He was an ex-business partner of my father's. They owned an industrial chemical company together, and they were no longer affiliated in business, but the gentleman owned a security agency.
And what was that? What is that man's name?
Anthony Negri.
And this is someone you knew and Lyle did not. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Now, why did you take him to meet with Mr. Negri?
Lyle had indicated a desire to get a handgun permit for Hayden. So while Hayden was in his employment, Hayden could also act as a bodyguard because the bodyguards that, like Richie Wenskowski and that he had hired were very expensive. And this way he could cut costs by using somebody that was already in his employment as a dual purpose.
Okay, and so let me withdraw that if I may. Did Hayden go with you to this meeting?
I don't believe so.
Who went?
I think it was just Lyle and myself.
And why were you meeting with this particular man?
Like I said, he owned a security agency, and we thought that he could give us some advice on how to go about getting a handgun permit for Hayden to legally carry a handgun.
And where was the security business that he owned?
In New York.
And where were you and Hayden and Lyle living?
In New Jersey.
And did you receive any information which led you to believe that Mr. Negri may have been connected to the mafia?
Only from Lyle.
And what was that information?
At one point during our meeting, I went to the bathroom and then we left. And Lyle told me after we left that Mr. Negri had made some comments to him when I wasn't in the room that I think I may know who was responsible for your parents' death, and don't worry about it. I'll put out the word that you're to be left alone.
And putting out the word meant telling the people in the mafia that.
I have no idea what it meant. I assume possibly that's what it meant.
Whatever happened to the restaurant?
It's still there. It went back to the original owner, I think, because Lyle missed a payment. That was my guess, but I don't know that for sure.
He was in
Your Honor, I
jail.
move to strike the answer now.
All right, the objection sustained. The entire answer is stricken, other than the reference to it's still there. Everything else is stricken. Jurors admonished to disregard the balance of the answer.
Thank you. Did you have a conversation with, let me back up a step. Do you know who the former owner and now present owner of Chuck's is?
Yes,
What's the man's name?
I believe it's John Argyris.
And did you have a conversation with him after he got the restaurant back?
I've seen him since, I think.
And did you tell him that you were happy that he got the restaurant back and Lyle lost it?
I don't recall making that statement.
Might you have made that statement?
It's possible, but I don't recall it specifically.
And we touched before on Eric Tam.
Mm-hmm.
Now, do you know who Eric Tam is?
I have met him, I believe, twice.
And did he take over the business after you stopped working there?
I don't know. I know that he was being groomed to do so, but I don't know if he took it over once I left.
And did you ever have any conversation with him on any topic?
Yes.
And did you ever have a conversation with him specifically with regard to writing a book or making a movie about this case?
I don't recall.
You might have?
I might have.
And did you ever have a conversation with him in which you were asking him for information either about Lyle's family or about the defense?
Objection asked and answered.
Overruled.
I don't recall.
But you might have.
I might have.
And you were funneling any information you got from any sources to the police. Is that correct?
I don't think that's a fair characterization of what I was doing, but certain things became privy to me that I then forwarded to the police, yes.
And you were doing this the entire time that you were in Lyle's employ and were his trusted friend. Is that correct?
I wouldn't say the entire time, no.
Oh, what period of time were you not giving them information? We have the first date on September 18th.
Yes, but okay, that's correct.
So between, say, September 1st and September 18th, you were not giving them information about him. Is that correct?
That is correct.
But from September 18th, 1989 on, you have continued to provide them with information.
I don't recall. It's possible that it happened. I don't recall speaking to the district attorneys or the officers between that original interview in September and when I spoke to Detective Zoller on May 18th. I might have, but I don't recall.
Well, I think I've already shown you interviews.
That could be. I have a problem with the dates, like I said.
Okay. Well, you saw the documents for October 24th.
Oh, yes, right.
You remember?
Okay, that's correct.
And there were, then you saw the documents also for several interviews in May, phone calls that you made. Prime time was on May 17th, 1990.
Mm-hmm.
You made several phone calls that day and the next day. Is that correct?
Several? I don't know. The one that you showed me, I do remember.
I think I showed you one from the 17th and one from the 18th.
Okay, that could be.
Okay, and those are ones we have documented. And you've indicated you've had over 20 conversations. Is that correct?
I said that could be. I have no knowledge of the exact number or where it's around there, probably.
We didn't finish with your resume. Were there any other embellishments on there?
Like I said, most likely.
Any that stand out at you?
Yeah. I was not a member of the Princeton Peer Tutoring Program.
Which appears under the activities section?
Yes, that's correct.
How about the Chem Lawn Services Corporation? Did you solicit $200,000 in new accounts?
I'm not sure if that number is correct or not.
That might be an embellishment.
Yes, it might
also.
be.
Did you actually work for them?
Yes, that's correct.
What else on there do you recognize as an embellishment?
At Hudson Fabricating, which no longer exists, I don't believe that says I supervised technical work of over 40 employees. That's probably an embellishment also.
What was the correct number?
I have no idea. It was a long time ago.
Anything else?
Not that I noticed offhand.
Now, is it your position that this learning to embellish is something that Princeton taught you?
Well, when this was written by a girlfriend of mine, she was also had been a Princeton student, had graduated, and told me, "Don't worry, everybody does it. That's what you're supposed to do." So
it didn't violate any personal code of honor you have? Or do you have one?
Yes, I do have a personal code of honor, and it probably violated it.
Thank you. I have nothing further.
Yes, Your Honor. It's going to go past the,
No, it's got to start.
Yes. Mr. Stevens, in 1989, I believe your testimony was that you were 20 years old. Is that correct?
Yes.
You want some more water?
Yeah, if it can be arranged. Thank you.
Now, as a 20-year-old, had you ever had any experience with any of your other friends being involved in the killing of their parents?
No.
Was that, would that have been a somewhat unique experience?
Yes.
Princeton University is a fairly good school, is that correct?
Yes.
Do they have a lot of classes offered there?
Yes.
Do they have any classes entitled What to Do When Your Best Friend Kills His Parents?
No.
Okay. Did you have any training in how to deal with the media?
No.
Did anyone come to you and counsel you on what to do when the reporters come knocking on your door?
No.
Now, I believe that you were shown some handwritten notes by Ms. Lansing involving something to do with, you weren't as candid on camera as you would have liked to have been. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
In what regard were you not candid with the interviewers?
Well, I had been asked by Lyle's family to do the interview because nobody else was going to say anything nice about him, and they said some of his friends should stand behind him and go say something nice. So I did, and the interview immediately went in the direction of implications against Lyle's guilt. And
So in what regard were you not candid with them?
I was trying to direct them away from that line of questioning.
Right, so your lack of candor was in saying anything negative to the press about Lyle, is that correct?
That's correct, I believe.
All right, now, who asked you to cooperate in that particular interview?
I don't recall whether it was discussed in the Baralt household, I believe.
Right, after the death of the parents, were you in fact friendly with the Baralts?
Yes, that's correct.
And after Lyle's arrest, did you have any contact with them?
Yes, that's correct.
And would it have been after the arrest that you were asked to do this interview? Is that correct?
They indicated that I should do the interview. Yes, but I'm not sure if I had agreed to do the interview. But they gave their consent to me doing the interview and said that I should, that nobody was saying anything nice about Lyle, and that I should do so.
May I approach, please, Your Honor?
Yes.
With these handwritten notes that were shown to you, in addition to having the phrase wasn't as candid on camera.
May I approach also and see what it is?
Yes.
And direct your attention.
It also indicates that that it was a positive interview. Is that correct?
Yes.
And is that in reference to your testimony just now that the family wanted you to do something positive on Lyle Menendez?
Yes, that's correct.
Now, Ms. Lansing has made much of the fact that that you were friends with Lyle and you were providing information to the police. Is that correct?
Yes.
I believe I asked you if you'd ever had this happen before. How did you feel during this period of time?
Like I said, I was going through a period of depression, and it was a very difficult period for me.
All right. Would the fact that, well, let me ask you this. After the parents were dead and you started spending time with Lyle again, Did you renew some of the feelings you had for him in the spring of 1989?
I would object that's leading and suggestive.
Overall.
Can you repeat the question? The spring of 1989?
Okay.
The dates
Do you have
again.
a problem with dates?
Yeah. Well, just that I took a year off, so sometimes I get
Okay.
confused about the dates.
The spring of your freshman year,
Mm-hmm.
you were close with Lyle.
Yes, that's correct.
His parents were still alive.
Yes.
You liked him,
Yes, that's correct.
and you considered him at that time to be your best friend.
Yes, that's correct.
During the summer, you had little contact with him, correct?
That's correct.
When you saw him after his parents' deaths in the fall of '89, which would have been the fall of your sophomore year,
Mhm.
did you continue to have the same sorts of feelings for him that you'd had in the spring?
Yes.
Did he also behave in a way that you found noticeable or different?
Yes.
And that was after the deaths of his parents?
Yes.
Did you have any problems with your feelings for him versus how he was acting?
Yes.
Right. Now, I believe you indicated he had been condescending to you. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
That was after the deaths of his parents?
Yes.
In what ways was he condescending to you?
He just he scolded me on occasion like I was an employee, and he was just very condescending to me. He had obtained this swagger and this arrogance, like I said, and it was very disturbing to me because it very often was directed towards me and others around us.
Did you have any kind of struggle with what you felt for him before and what was going on?
Well, yes, I immediately started to think to myself, well, who knows how people react after their parents are killed.
Okay, now, did you ever try to, well, I guess you're just saying, did you try to rationalize his behavior?
Yes, very often.
You've testified on direct to a number of incriminating things that Lyle Menendez said to you, or would you characterize them as incriminating?
Yeah, there were certain incriminating things that were brought to my attention.
At the time that they were brought to your attention, did you notice them as being incriminating?
Yes.
Some of those things you reported to the police, is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Some of those things you didn't report until you were actually in town to testify for the grand jury, is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
How do you feel about testifying against Lyle?
I sort of feel like I have to tell what I know. I know some things. If they turn out to be important, fine. If they don't, fine.
How do you feel emotionally?
It's not easy.
You used to care very much for him, is that correct?
That's correct.
After you found out that he had been arrested for the murders, in fact, you were there, right?
When he was arrested, yes.
Did the police throw you on the ground?
Yes.
Was that rather startling?
Yes.
And after you found out that Lyle had been arrested for the murders, did you begin to look back over some of the things that had gone on in the fall?
Your Honor, I'm going to object. Continues to be leading.
Objection sustained. The question is being leading, and we'll lead right into a lunch hour here, ladies and gentlemen, and resume at 1:30. Don't discuss this case with anyone. Don't form any opinions about it. When I say don't discuss this case with anyone, I mean each one of you is instructed not to talk about it among yourselves or with anyone else. And we'll resume at 1:30. If you can all report back here at 1:30.
The audience remain seated, please, until the jury leaves.
Participants are all at council table. The witnesses on the witness stand. Would you state your name again for the record, please?
Glenn Stevens.
All right, Mr. Stevens, you're still under oath. You were in the midst of redirect examination.
Correct.
All right, you may proceed.
Thank you. Mr. Stevens, during the lunch hour, did you tell me something?
Yes, I did.
What did you tell me?
Well, you had said something to me at the break that reminded me of something I figured I should probably let you know about. So,
Okay, what did you tell me?
is during,
I'm sorry. What did you tell me?
like I said, during the break.
Turn on that microphone.
It is on.
Okay.
You said,
Pardon me. I'm going to go stand at the where the other mic is. Does that broadcast in the courtroom, Your Honor?
Yes, that's
Okay.
a public address.
All right. Now then.
you said something in the break that reminded me that during the end period when I was still in Mr. Menendez's employment, it became obvious to me that he was going to ask me to leave the restaurant and leave me in a state of financial distress. So for a few weeks there was a couple of occasions where I had pilfered some of the money from the cash register, and I thought that you should know that.
Let me ask you about your financial arrangement with Mr. Menendez. What was your understanding of what was the offer to you by Lyle Menendez as to how much money he would pay you for these services that you were going to render to him?
I was under the impression that $600 a week salary would take care of me until I went back to school.
You were planning to go back to school when?
In February of the 1991, I believe.
Now, how were you paying for Princeton while you were there?
Financial aid, and my parents were paying for as much as they could, and also I worked over the summer and tried to save money.
Were you then partially responsible for the cost of your tuition and room and board?
Yes, that's correct.
Is Princeton an inexpensive school to attend?
It's very expensive.
Did you take out student loans?
Yes.
Do you still have student loans?
Yes.
About how much money would you say was involved in this act that you told us about?
Over the course of a couple months, probably around $200.
Okay. And I believe that Ms. Lansing asked you about this Rolex watch, and you indicated that you'd sold it. Now, let me back up. When you left the university in February of 1990, okay, to go work for Lyle Menendez,
yes,
had you already paid a portion of your tuition?
For that semester, yes, I had. I was already about 2 weeks into the semester when I left, and I had to forfeit, I believe it was around something like $2,000.
Okay, was any representation made to you by Lyle Menendez as to giving you money for that $2,000 loss?
He was he came to my house one night, sat down with my parents and myself, and worked out an arrangement that he was to be responsible for that. And if I was going to leave school and be in his employment, he was going to have to be responsible for that, because my parents refused to let me leave school unless he would cover whatever costs it would cost me to leave.
Did you ever get the $2,000?
No.
When did you have a actual contract with him, a signed contract?
It was an oral agreement. I don't know if my mother got. I remember we sat down and drew up some things on paper. It wasn't a formal contract with attorneys or anything like that.
Was part of your understanding with Mr. Menendez that in addition to the $600 a week, you would be receiving other types of perks?
Yes, like I said, well, there was the automobile, the living expenses, and I was supposed to pay for that out of my salary. I don't recall the exact arrangement, but there was a lot of the financial arrangements that never materialized.
Okay, what kind of financial arrangements did not materialize?
Like I said, that he didn't cover the costs of me leaving school. It just turned out to be a lot less than I had been made to believe.
Your Honor, could the court ask the jury if the jury can hear?
Yeah.
Okay. Mr. Stevens, I believe in your cross-examination, you mentioned the name Jamie Pizarczyk in regards to a request that you got after the arrest. Is that correct?
Yes.
Who was Jamie Pizarczyk?
She was Lyle's ex-girlfriend and, well, ongoing on and off girlfriend.
After Lyle Menendez was arrested in March of 1990, you continued to work for him. Is that correct?
Yes.
Why did you continue to work for him?
Well, I thought it was that I should give him the benefit of the doubt in the case, and that we had made an agreement, and I needed to for financial reasons. It was my job.
Did you need the money?
Yes.
I believe you mentioned something about, or you were asked about a person named Steve Goldberg. Did you ever meet Mr. Goldberg?
Yes.
Do you know who he is?
He was an attorney friend of the Menendez family.
Now, while you were working at the restaurant, was there someone else aside from you who managed the restaurant?
Yes.
And who was that?
Gus Tangelos.
You mentioned as part of your agreement with Lyle Menendez that you had a leased car, I think you said? Or no, you got the down payment.
Yes.
All right. And what kind of car was that?
It was a Volvo, a used one.
Do you remember what model?
It was 1984 760 GLE.
What happened to the car?
You mean now?
Yeah, where is
well, the payments were finished on it, and it was mine. And
okay, that's all I wanted to know. You ended up owning it?
Yeah.
Hayden Rogers was mentioned several times. Could you tell us who Hayden, well, I think you did tell us. Hayden Rogers was a friend of Lyle's, is that correct?
Yes, and also of mine.
Okay, could you give us a description of Hayden?
Physical description?
Sure.
It's about 6'5", 260, 70 pounds, something like that.
6'5"?
Just about.
Okay. After Lyle's arrest, were you angry with him?
Not immediately. As it became obvious to me that the boys might be involved in the killings, I got very angry at him, to be honest.
Now, you were asked about this person, Mr. Salerno. I think the nickname was Fat Tony Salerno.
Yes.
Have you ever met Mr. Salerno?
No, I have not.
Now, I think you indicated he was a friend of your grandfather's. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
All right. And so you were never taken to visit this man when you were a little kid or anything that you remember?
No, I just heard my father talk about him as Uncle Tony, and he had mentioned what he was reputed to be on several occasions. And for a while, I was actually under the impression that he was actually an uncle of my father's, and I've since found out that that wasn't true. He just called him Uncle Tony because he was close friends.
Okay, and you weren't alive when your grandfather made friends with him, were you?
No.
Okay. I have nothing further of this witness at this time.
Any recross? All right.
Mr. Stevens,
Yes.
you were asked by the district attorney at the beginning of the redirect whether you'd ever received any training in dealing with friends who'd had their parents killed.
Correct.
Remember that? And you said you hadn't.
Correct.
Do you think that whether you tell the truth varies on the circumstance? Is it okay to lie in some situations and not okay to lie in others?
Yeah, I would say so.
Okay. And so in a situation like this, where you think that someone may have killed their parents, the rules are different than they are under normal circumstances?
I think that would be a fair statement.
Okay. You said that you gave the interview, a televised interview, because the family had asked you to.
Partly, yes.
And those family members specifically were Aunt Terry and Uncle Carlos?
Yes, I think maybe Aunt Marta also. Okay. I don't recall exactly who.
You knew Lyle's aunts and uncles?
Yes.
And did they treat you well?
Yes, I must say very much so.
And so you felt obligated because they had been nice to you to do this thing, to give this interview on television. Is that correct?
That's partly the reason, yes.
Now, when you were interviewed on television, you talked to him about, or you talked about the fact that Lyle's father was very demanding.
Yes.
Was that the truth or was that a lie?
That was the truth from my understanding.
And you talked about the fact that Lyle idolized his father and felt that he would have a hard time ever living up to him. Was that the truth?
Yes, that's the truth.
You told them on television that he had talked to you on several occasions about how the money wasn't cushioning the blow for him, that he wasn't dulling the pain in any way.
Yeah, I object to any further questions as being hearsay and irrelevant.
May I be heard?
How much more of that do you have?
I have about 3 other areas to ask him, just briefly.
Yes, you may approach and we'll discuss it.
Mr. Stevens, when you knew Lyle before his parents died, did he have nice clothes?
Yeah, I would say so.
Did he have nice things?
From what I could see in his dorm room, yeah.
Things like what?
I just remember that the furniture, he brought in his own furniture into the room. It looked sort of nice, and his clothes in his closet looked nice. I don't recall exactly, but there were some, nice things there, expensive things. I remember there was a nice leather coat and things like that.
Did you ever hear him complain that he was unhappy with his circumstance with his parents with regard to money?
Not that I recall.
Did you find him to be a very trusting person?
Almost to a fault, yes.
And did he loan things to people?
Can't think of anything specifically, but it's possible.
How about his Porsche? Did he loan it to Greg Guest?
I'm not sure whether that was an actual loan or if Greg took it without permission. I don't know. But I know Greg drove it for a period of time. Yes.
A couple of weeks, right?
Yeah, Lyle was away for some reason, yes.
Did he ever loan the Porsche to you?
No, I don't drive a stick shift.
You told us that you left school in part because of this depression you were experiencing. Is that correct?
Yes, that's true.
Were you taking any medication for that depression?
Actually, yes, I was.
What kind of medication were you taking?
It was just a prescription antidepressant. I think it was called Elavil.
And for what period of time were you taking that medication?
I don't exactly know. A couple of months, maybe.
Are you still taking it today?
No.
And did you have any side effects from that medication?
Yeah. Things like dry mouth and sometimes difficulty sleeping.
Did it affect your ability to remember things or to understand what was going on?
It actually was given to me to help me in that regard, to help me concentrate better, and it seemed to work.
Yeah. You told us that your resentment of Lyle was focused to a large degree on the fact that he treated you like an employee. Is that right?
Yes, that's prior to actually being an employee.
Okay. And you wanted to be treated like a close, trusted friend. Is that right?
Yeah, that's correct.
And you saw him treat other people as closer friends than he was treating you. Is that correct?
At that time, no. I always felt that he had a special thing for Donovan.
They had a special friendship.
Yes, but Donovan was gone by the time he started treating me poorly, I felt.
Donovan was gone because you and your friends had convinced Lyle.
Yes.
That he should go.
Yes.
You said that you knew Jamie Pizarczyk. The name came up.
Yes.
And how long had she been Lyle's girlfriend?
At what time are you talking about?
Do you know how many years the relationship spanned?
I was only aware of a relationship between Lyle and Jamie Pizarczyk when I first met him. They were sort of on the rocks. They were dating. So, and up until at the time of the arrest, he was dating her again, but they had broken up for a period. I don't know much about that relationship.
Did they go back together again after his parents' death?
Yes.
And that was during a period of time you were spending time around Lyle. Is that correct?
Yes.
You said that Mrs. Bozanich had said something to you in the hall which made you think that
right here. Right, it was in here, okay. Yes.
That you should volunteer this information about having stolen the money?
Yes.
And what was it that triggered that memory?
She was referring to the questions about the accountant and the accounting thing, and she said something, well, do you think they're asking you that because of stolen money from the register? And I thought about it and I said, no, I don't think so. And then I recalled the couple of incidents that occurred later on in employment.
Okay. You would take money out and write IOUs sometimes, wouldn't you?
IOUs?
And put them in the cash register when you took money?
That could be correct. I don't recall.
And other times you took money and didn't write IOUs. Is that correct?
Yeah, well, I just admitted to that.
Right. And are you aware that after you took control of the restaurants, the reported daily receipts went from $1,800?
Excuse me, that calls for hearsay, Your Honor.
I'm asking if he's aware.
After he left?
No, after Mr. Menendez was arrested and Mr. Stevens was running the restaurant. That's the period of time I'm directing my attention to.
Right. What would...
Your Honor,
the question.
Thank you. Are you aware that after Lyle Menendez was arrested and you were now at the restaurant without him, the daily receipts went from $1,800 per day to $500 per day?
I wasn't aware of that, no.
This was during the time that you were taking money?
No.
The taking the money came later?
Yes.
And you felt that Lyle owed you the $2,000 because of the agreement he'd had to pay for that, is that correct?
Yes.
And so you felt justified in taking the money on your own?
I never felt justified in taking any money. I just took the money because I got vindictive.
Now, Lyle was arrested about a month after he'd made that agreement with you, isn't that true?
Yes, that's correct.
And the 1984 Volvo you referred to, and this was purchased in 1989?
I don't know the date.
Well, it was purchased before his arrest, which was in March of 90, is that correct?
No, I don't think so. I believe it was purchased after the arrest.
And the down payment came from the business, is that correct?
From Uncle Carlos. I don't know where he got it from.
And the payments were made on it by the business for a part of the time?
That's possible. I vaguely remember Uncle Carlos telling me, well, we'll just pay you the extra money and you pay it out of your paycheck, the car payments, because we don't want to have to deal with that paperwork, something along those lines.
Okay. And where's that car today?
In the junkyard somewhere, I imagine. A friend of mine borrowed it at school this year and it was totaled.
Was it insured?
Yes.
Did you receive any insurance proceeds on it?
Yes, I did.
And did you ever reimburse Uncle Carlos the money, the down payment or anything?
No.
Mrs. Bazanich asked you about Uncle Tony Salerno.
Mm-hmm.
And is he alive now or is he dead?
I believe he died in prison last year.
And how long was he in prison?
Objection irrelevant.
Your Honor, she's asked if he ever met him. That's the basis for those questions.
Objection irrelevant.
Still sustained.
Excuse me a minute. Yeah, that's the last one. Just for clarification, I had asked you a number of questions this morning about what you called embellishments.
Mm-hmm.
Do you remember that?
Yes.
Can you tell me, one of them was you supervised 5 employees and you claimed to have supervised 20. You called that an embellishment. Is that correct?
Yes.
Can be on the scope, Your Honor.
I just would like him to define the term, Your Honor. I forgot to do that
All right,
before.
we're not going through the
No,
litany again.
we're not going through the litany.
Okay, you can ask the question.
Yes. Can you tell me what your definition is of the word embellishment?
It's an over-exaggeration. That's my definition of it.
Is it the same as a lie?
Sometimes they can be the same thing.
Thank you.
Any further direct?
Just a couple questions, Your Honor. Mr. Stevens, I believe you were asked at the beginning of recross something to the effect of that it's okay to lie in some situations. Remember that testimony you gave?
Yes, just now.
Well, no. When I finished questioning you after lunch, Ms. Lansing asked you about, is it okay to lie in some situations? And I believe you indicated yes.
Yes.
Okay. Are you lying now?
No, not that I know of.
I'm going to object is vague. I'm not sure what now is.
Did you
All
lie
right.
during your testimony?
Not to my knowledge.
Okay. Now, I believe you indicated before that you had watched part of this trial back east on Courtroom TV. Is that correct?
Yes.
Do you have relatives back east?
Yes, I do.
Are you about to start a new job back east?
Yes, that's correct.
And these are the areas in which the TV is being played?
Yes.
Okay. And you said all this in court, and it's being...
I'm going to object to the leading nature of this.
Yeah, you could rephrase it a little bit.
Okay. Are you aware of the fact that the things you're saying in this courtroom are going to be transmitted to people who know you?
Yes.
Thank you.
Anything else?
Nothing further. Thank you.
All right, did you indicate you wanted to keep the witness here a little bit this afternoon or not?
Well, we want to use them at another time.
Okay.
He's
All
not
right, well, we'll keep him here for a few minutes and deal with that. Let me see counsel at the sidebar just for a moment. All right. Would you state your name again for the record, sir?
Yes, Donovan Goodreau.
All right, Mr. Goodrow, you're still under oath in this case. You understand that?
Yes.
Okay. There's an examination by the defendant, Lyle Menendez. Okay.
Mr. Goodrow, you had a number of interviews with a reporter named Bob Rand, is that correct?
Yes.
And at least one of them was conducted while being tape recorded, is that correct?
Yes.
I'd like to direct your attention to various areas of your testimony here before and re-ask some of the questions based on that interview so you'll understand what the source is. All right?
Fine.
You had testified here that Lyle had very little money prior to his parents' death. Is that correct?
Yes.
You seem to hesitate. Are you unsure of that, or?
Well, he had more than I did, but yes, very little.
Do you remember telling Mr. Rand that you ate lunch out every day, you and Lyle?
No.
Is it your testimony that you did not tell him that?
I don't recall telling him that. It's not the truth.
So if you told if your voice is on the tape saying that, then that's a lie. Is that correct?
I don't think I could remember why I would say we ate lunch out every day.
I'm not asking you why. I'm asking you if your voice appears on tape saying you ate lunch out every day in an interview with Bob Rand, then you would have been lying to Bob Rand. Is that correct?
Objection calls for speculation. Lack of foundation.
Overruled.
Yes.
You told us here the other day that Lyle did not pay the bill for you, pick up the tab very often. Is that correct?
No, he picked up the tab.
Regularly?
Yes, he did.
Do you remember telling Mr. Rand that Lyle was always buying dinner and margaritas for the two of you?
No, I don't recall that.
Did Lyle buy dinner and margaritas regularly for the two of you?
I can only recall eating there once with Lyle, and whether or not he paid a check, I cannot remember.
So if your voice appears on that tape saying he was always buying dinner and margaritas, would you have been lying to Mr. Rand at that time?
I have no idea.
Well, do you think your memory was better when you were interviewed by Mr. Rand, or do you think you just told different stories?
I think I can't recall. I don't remember exactly how or why I said that.
Well, would you have said it if it was false?
I'm not sure under the circumstances.
So you might have said it if it was false?
I may have not wanted to imply that Lyle was buying me dinner all the time, sure.
No, but you told him that he was buying you dinner.
Lyle may have purchased dinner at this restaurant, but whether or not I said it on the tape, I can't recall.
No. What I'm asking, you said, assume you said on the tape, Lyle was always buying me dinner and margaritas. My question of you, is that true? Was Lyle always buying you dinner and margaritas?
Is that true? No.
Okay, so you would have been lying to Mr. Rand if that's on the tape.
Objection argumentative.
Overruled.
Yes.
If on the tape your voice indicates Lyle loaned money to people all the time. Is that true or false?
That's true.
Okay. And The ticket that Lyle sent you to come out to California, was that ticket worth about $300?
Yes, it was.
And did you ever pay him for it?
No, I didn't.
Do you remember at this time whether both his father and mother called the morning that you had to leave that dorm room?
Do I remember which one of the two called?
Or do you remember if it was both?
I do remember someone called. I think it was his father.
If on the tape your voice says first mom, then dad called, do you think your memory was better when you were interviewed by Mr. Rand a couple years ago than it is now?
Objection assumes facts not in evidence that it was 2 years ago.
Perhaps we can establish.
I'm sorry, it was
what
March of
interview took place.
92, a year and a half.
Can you repeat the question?
Yes. On the tape, you say first mom called, then dad. And I'm asking you now if your memory was better in March of 92 when you were interviewed by Mr. Rand than it is now.
I can't answer that. I don't. Pertaining to that question, if my memory was better back then as it is now, I wouldn't have said it unless I wouldn't have said his mom called unless she really did.
Okay, so should we assume then that that is the correct statement, that first mom called, then dad?
Yes.
Did you fly first class when you flew home with Lyle?
No.
Do you remember telling Mr. Rand that you flew first class coming back from Los Angeles?
I think I used first class in a figure of speech.
What figure?
Well, we
of
always
speech?
went, everywhere we went was first class.
And did you have the money to go everywhere first class, or did Lyle have the money?
Neither Lyle nor myself had the money at the time.
So how did you go first class?
I just answered that. We always traveled well. We had his father's car out in Los Angeles, and we traveled on the planes. There was no one seating. It was a red-eye fly back, so there was no one sitting anywhere, so we went up sitting in a better section.
Okay. But when you did things with Lyle, I think you said you always did them first class in terms of just a general characterization of his lifestyle?
Yes.
When you left the dorm room at Princeton, did you find later that you had any property that belonged to Lyle?
Yes, I did.
And what was that?
Sweater.
Did you ever make any effort to return the sweater to him?
I attempted to call the dorm room afterwards, but not to return the sweater. No.
Did you borrow $400 from Lyle?
Cash? No.
Do you remember telling Mr. Rand that you borrowed $400 from Lyle and that you thought that Lyle might have thought that you'd stolen it?
No. I don't remember that at all.
So if your voice is on the tape saying that, is that a lie? Or is that, do you think your memory was better then?
Objection argumentative.
Rule.
I'm having a tough time answering these because these questions were asked a long time ago.
I understand that. But there is a tape recording on which your voice appears saying that you borrowed $400 from Lyle and you thought that Lyle might have thought you had stolen it.
Well, I'd have to understand the context of why I said that. It might help me remember whether or not I was referring to the plane ticket and an additional to something else.
Well, the plane ticket's $300. Okay, so we're
I'm
talking.
aware of that.
Okay, so now, do you remember borrowing $400 from Lyle on more than one occasion?
I don't remember borrowing $400, no.
So if that's what it says on the tape, then that would have been a lie?
I can't answer that. I have no idea if it was a lie or not. I don't remember borrowing $400.
Do you think that when you told Mr. Rand it might have been the truth and your memory was better a year and a half ago than it is now?
I can't answer that. Same answer as last time.
Do you remember telling Mr. Rand that Lyle had told you that when he graduated, his dad was going to loan him $2 million to set him up in business?
I remember Lyle had mentioned to me that, so I guess I would have returned, in return said that to Mr. Rand.
Okay. Now, you told us about a situation in which You and Lyle flew back from Los Angeles. He couldn't get his car out of long-term parking, and you had to borrow $50 from his grandmother. Do you remember telling us about that?
His grandmother gave him $50. He didn't borrow it. Okay. She had owed him the money.
Okay, so she was just giving him back the money she owed him.
I was under the impression that was true.
That's all I have at this time with this witness, Your Honor.
Any redirect?
No, Your Honor.
All right. We'll take a short break and resume. I'd ask that the jurors return to the jury room here, and as soon as we're ready, we'll have you come out. Don't discuss the case with anyone. Don't form any opinions about it, and we'll have you out fairly soon. The defendants are both in court with their attorneys. People are represented, and counsel have presented to the court a transcript of the proceedings that occurred in the municipal court on August the 13th, 1990, in relationship to the defendants, both defendants' refusal to provide handwriting samples. And counsel indicate that this relates both to the testimony of the handwriting comparison expert as well as the issue of the refusal to provide the samples. I've read the materials, and do counsel wish to argue the matter?
Yes, Your Honor. As to the admissibility of Mr. Clausen's testimony, it's, as the court knows from the grand jury proceeding, essentially a matter of opinion testimony.
Mr. Clausen.
Mr. Gross, excuse me. His testimony will essentially be that he compared handwriting samples that were in possession of the prosecution with the handwriting in the ATF records from the Big Five sporting goods and made certain conclusions based on those comparisons. And our objection is under Evidence Code sections 801 and 802. And the specific objection is that he is forming his opinion based on matter that is not properly the subject of expert testimony. And the argument is based, Your Honor, on an estoppel theory. And the estoppel theory is that Mr. Al-Hadaf, representing the district attorney's office, when this matter was first litigated in the municipal court, to give the court a little bit of background on that, this matter as to whether the defendant should submit a handwriting exemplar was litigated August 13th, 1990. Prior to that date, the people had already done, at least as to Lyle Menendez, a handwriting comparison based on handwriting samples that they had in their possession. And there is a report dated June 20th, 1990, indicating that a handwriting expert by the name of Richard Clausen, C-L-A-S-O-N, had made certain comparisons between handwriting samples written by Lyle Menendez and the question, some question documents that he was examining. And the position taken by the defense at the August 13th hearing was that there was no need to order further handwriting exemplars because the people were already in possession of samples that they could use. And in response to that position, Mr. Al-Hadaf states at page 10 of the hearing transcript that, quote, "Can you imagine what would happen if we were to bring an expert on this witness stand and ask him whether or not he made an analysis of the defendant's handwriting without a comparison of the defendant's handwriting? It would be outrageous." And it's our position that having taken that position, that the prosecution is now stopped from arguing otherwise and is stopped from arguing that that the handwriting expert that they propose to introduce is properly testifying based on the comparison documents that he had in his possession.
Your view is that Mr. Al-Hadaf would regard the people's proposed evidence as outrageous, and therefore the people shouldn't be able to produce it in this trial?
On the estoppel theory, that is that when a representative of the people take a certain position in litigation, and this is a well-known theory that I think is the court can follow here, that when the representative of the people take a position which is inconsistent with the position they're taking now, that the court can hold them to their original position, which was that this is improper expert testimony without the defendant providing a specific handwriting example.
All right, good try, Mr. Burt. Yes. All right, that objection is overruled.
All right. And as to the second objection, Your Honor, the evidence concerning the refusal, as I indicated to the court, the background for this refusal was that the prosecution already had in their possession handwriting exemplars. And the position taken by the defendant's counsel at the time was that given that fact, they were going to advise the clients to refuse to provide the handwriting exemplars. Now, whether that was a wise decision or not might be debated. And I think the point here is that it's a decision that the client should not have to pay the price for what perhaps someone would characterize as a bad judgment call. And it's our position, Your Honor, based on the case we cited to the court, People versus Houston, that where a refusal is based on the advice of counsel, that it is of questionable relevance, and the court explicitly says that it would be questionably relevant to introduce into evidence a refusal of someone based on the advice of counsel. It would be especially so in this case, given the fact that counsel, as indicated in the transcript that I provided to the court, we're taking the position that since the people already had the handwriting exemplars in hand, that they could properly refuse and so advise the clients. If the court were to allow this evidence, it gets into collateral issues. We have to be in a position of perhaps calling Mr. Chaliff on behalf of Lyle Menendez to explain the circumstances of the refusal. And all of this, because allegedly this refusal is relevant to consciousness of guilt, and as we repeatedly argued to the court, consciousness of guilt is an identity question. And this handwriting refusal is not probative in any case of the issue of whether these killings were murder of the first degree or something less. It's probative, if at all, on the issue of identity, but in any event, it's certainly not probative in a case such as this, where identity is not an issue and where allowing the introduction of this evidence would cause the defense to have to litigate collateral issues in order to explain the basis for this refusal.
Well, let me just respond to that and then I'll hear further argument. The handwriting, as I understand it, relates to the purchase of the firearms, the shotguns, and the purchase of the shotguns 2 days before the killings is strong circumstantial evidence as regards to the state of mind of the defendants as to whether there really was imminent danger to them. And it's strong circumstantial evidence that they had at least 2 days in order to deal with this situation without using deadly force, and yet chose to return to the house with these shotguns, and it reflects upon their state of mind, and it, in this context, is circumstantial evidence relating to the degree of crime and the nature of the crime as to whether it's a first-degree murder or whether it's something else, and therefore it is relevant evidence, and the identification is not the only issue here, but also the degree of crime established by the purchase of the firearms and the fact that the defendants refused to provide handwriting is circumstantial evidence that they were resisting the prosecution's attempts to identify the defendants as those individuals who purchased these firearms, to connect them with the purchase of the firearms and prevent them from establishing the people's theory as far as why the killings happened and the circumstances of the killing. So I disagree with you that it's not relevant evidence. The only concern I have has to do with the fact that we do get into collateral matters here. Counsel at the municipal court argued various reasons why they did not turn over the handwriting or advise their clients not to turn over handwriting samples. It's also quite clear from the transcript that there was no concession by the defense at that time in August of 1990 that the defendants had purchased these weapons. So that was still an issue that the defense was, by the plea of not guilty, disputing, and the people had to prove. So the failure or the refusal to provide a handwriting sample is evidence of consciousness of guilt in this particular case. I disagree with your appraisal that it doesn't at all relate to it. The issue is whether there's too much collateral matters raised or too many issues raised that would confuse a jury and confuse the issue, and also cut away from the strength of the people's argument that this refusal is circumstantial evidence of consciousness of guilt, that there was advice of counsel as to why the handwriting samples were not provided, and the explanations counsel gave at that time to not provide the samples or have their clients not provide the samples. And I suppose the state of mind of counsel then becomes an issue, and the credibility of counsel perhaps is an issue. Let me hear further from the prosecution and the defendant Eric Menendez on this whole thing, since Ms. Abramson was present and participated in those proceedings.
Yes, Your Honor. Our position is that the probative value of this refusal as consciousness of guilt really depends on the inferences that one can draw from the refusal. There are a number of reasons for the refusal that are apparent in the transcript that indicate that the inference of consciousness of guilt should not be drawn from the refusal. Ms. Abramson indicated that she had already received a report that they had made the signatures on the firearms records to her client, and that they were not entitled to an additional handwriting exemplar to, in essence, bolster or to confirm an already made identification. Secondly, there was a dispute as to whether the documents that were used for comparison purposes had been provided to the defense, and there was some discovery issue that was raised, and that also went into the refusal. So that I think the 352 of issues that are raised by presenting this evidence are substantial. We would then be put in a position of having to rebut the inference that the prosecution seeks to draw from the refusal by testimony about the reasons for the refusal. And that task does involve, to some extent, the credibility of counsel in presenting their account of their thinking and the reasons why they advised the clients in this case not to provide the handwriting refusal, so not to provide the exemplar. So I think that not only is this a refusal made on advice of counsel, but it is a refusal that does not support the inference that the prosecution have drawn from it. And I think that the time that would be spent litigating the issue of this refusal is probably not worth the very slight probative value that the refusal might have.
Let me ask you this, hypothetically, let us assume there was no handwriting make, and not even the qualified make that we have here, and the defendant had not provided any sample of his handwriting based upon counsel's advice. Is it your position then that that evidence should not be before the jury, that the defendants did not provide handwriting samples, and that is something that is preventing a complete and thorough analysis of the handwriting?
No, Your Honor, I think we have a very different situation here, because there was testimony before the grand jury by Mr. Gross that it wouldn't have helped him reach a better conclusion or more definite conclusion if he had had additional samples. So that situation simply doesn't present itself here. It wouldn't have done any good. Even if my client had given the handwriting example, we would still be listening to the same tentative identification or make.
But at that point, at least nobody could complain that your client had not provided a sample and was trying to cover something up or conceal something by not providing the sample.
Well, but the claim that this was an attempt to conceal something by the sample is simply not factually supported by the record in municipal court. where it was clear that counsel knew there already had been a make, so this was not any vital evidence that was being withheld from the prosecution. Ms. Abramson had been informed that they had a handwriting comparison made, and that the handwriting on the firearms records had been made to her client. And this wasn't a tentative make, it was a positive make. Yes, by a separate examiner, so that I don't think that we need to consider what our position might be given the state of facts that is not before the court.
Well, except that the defense didn't know that at the time, or the defense didn't know at the time the refusal was made, that the handwriting would not have been helpful.
Right, we knew at the time the refusal was made that they had a positive make.
All right, but you also know that the people were asking for more, which would give most people the idea that they needed more, or they wouldn't be asking for it. And other than the great imposition on a defendant who spends every day in county jail doing very little and being required to then fill out a handwriting exemplar, there really wasn't much involved in preparing the exemplar.
But this wasn't a decision made because it was somehow counsel didn't want to comply, or they were trying to thwart the investigation. This was a decision that was made because counsel believed that there was already a make. There was some concern about what was being used to have the comparison made, and there was a concern that there had been discovery violations and that all the documents hadn't been turned over to counsel. So this was an informed decision by counsel based on facts that are clearly stated in the record.
Can I say a few things not under oath if I may? I mean, I didn't have to go into
I don't think you should. It should be presented by counsel at this point. All right, anything else? All right, let me hear the people's response, and then you can work out your motion.
Your Honor, first of all, it's my recollection that the request for the handwriting exemplars from the defendants predated the August 13th admonition by the court by several months. I don't have a conformed copy, but Mr. Burton and I at lunch looked at a copy of the request for a handwriting exemplar that Mr. Al had prepared, and it was dated March the 20th. I can't represent that that was the date that it was filed, but I do know it was filed well in advance of the 19th and 13th of August. And I do know that during the pendency of the municipal court proceedings, it was mentioned several times and always continued, and that there was a great deal of foot dragging that went on. Now, on the page 15 and page 20, it appears that on the 13th of August of 1990, the defendants were brought out separately, and the court admonished each of them separately on those 2 pages. The use of the prosecution could make these refusals, and absent of showing that the defendants were not compos mentis at the time that these admonitions were made by the court, I think that it is highly unfair to the prosecution that an adult, competent male defendant can be advised of this and then stand behind the attorney and say, well, my attorney made me do it. This is a right personal to the defendant, and as Ms. Abramson points out at page 12 of his transcript, he, meaning her client, has the right to refuse, and then the people can use that in whatever way they see fit at trial, but he isn't going to do it. So it seems to me that to not deny the people the force of the evidence simply by saying that it was the choice of counsel is to belie the fact that the defendant is the one who has the ultimate choice, just as the defendant has the ultimate choice whether or not to testify in trial. And the fact of the matter is that it was not known to the prosecution until the summer of '92, and I put on in front of the grand jury to help give something to the defense that the handwriting exemplars wouldn't have helped. And I did that because I'm obligated to put on things that are exonerating. I put that in. I'm sure the defense will bring it out when Mr. Gross testifies. But the witnesses available that we had to authenticate the handwriting, absent an exemplar, might not have been available at trial. And the counsel are now going to stipulate to it, but that might not have been the case. And so the fact that Mr. Gross couldn't have really made much use of these exemplars doesn't mean that the defendant is any less conscious of his guilt. And I think that if there are issues that need to be raised as regards to the defendant's state of mind as to what he thought the purpose was in refusing, then I think that he can explain that. I think in any case where there's a refusal, there's going to be an explanation from the defendant. But just as the defendant has no right to refuse, and
the attorney has no ability to force her client to refuse. And for that reason, I don't think the people should be denied the benefit of the probative effect of this this testimony because the defendants are hiding behind their attorneys.
All right, anything further?
Yes, I think briefly, the court indicated that it thought this evidence was relevant because it was probative on the issue of whether the one or both defendants purchased the guns on the 21st, which in turn was relevant to the issue of the degree of the crime. And I agree with the court's analysis insofar as the refusal would be relevant to whether they purchased the weapons on that day. But as the court will recall from Ms. Abramson's opening statement, she conceded to the jury that her client testified that he was the one who purchased the weapons. So there is no issue. And I can represent to the court that that same testimony will be forthcoming from our client, Lyle Menendez. There is no issue as to whether they purchased the weapons or one person purchased weapons on that day. And in fact, we indicated to the prosecution that we'd be willing to stipulate as to that particular issue. So I think the court should take that into account in deciding probative value versus prejudice. Second of all, she made reference to a statement made by Ms. Abramson, conspicuously did not make any statement regarding what Mr. Chaliff said, but at one point Mr. Chaliff states in the presence of Lyle Menendez, if he chooses not to do it, then they would be maybe admitted into evidence or whatever evidentiary value that has. So at least as to Lyle Menendez, again, I think the argument back and forth here illustrates the collateral issues we're going to get into if this evidence is allowed. If it goes in, then we have to call Mr. Chaliff as to what he told Lyle Menendez in terms of whether the prosecution could use this or not. It appears from the record he told them maybe they could, maybe they couldn't. We'd have to go into the basis for why Mr. Chaliff gave him that information. And the question here is not whether he had a right to refuse. The question is it probative given the fact that the lawyer is telling the client that he should refuse to do so. And I think it's a 352 issue. I also think it penalizes the client for relying on the advice of his counsel, and it would be a Sixth Amendment violation as well.
Well, one could look at it the other way and say it penalizes the defendant who is not represented by counsel and is asked for a handwriting sample and provides it versus the defendant who is represented by counsel and his lawyer advises him, or let me back up, the unrepresented defendant who is asked for a handwriting sample and refuses versus the represented defendant who is asked for a handwriting sample and refuses and then says, my lawyer told me to do it and therefore you can't comment on it, whereas the defendant who did not have counsel would not have that argument. So really, if someone suffers from this sort of situation, it's the unrepresented defendant rather than the represented defendant.
I agree there's that dichotomy there, and yet the court in Houston says exactly that. That is that the refusal in that case prior to the lawyer being involved was admissible.
Well, that court didn't say the other was not admissible. It just said that it had less weight and could be construed as an area of 352 analysis.
Well, it's specifically said the probative value of defendant's subsequent refusal following his attorney's advice to refuse is more questionable.
Yeah, well, when you have only one refusal and that refusal is based upon advice of counsel and the court is not presented with the dual situation that was presented in the Houston case, then we don't have the opportunity to admit the prior refusal before counsel came on the scene and then exclude the refusal that was made upon advice of counsel. So that's a difference.
The only other thing I wanted to add is that this is not a situation where the defendant is taking the position that his lawyer can erroneously advise him, contrary to what the law is, that he has some sort of right to refuse. This is a case-specific advice by the attorney based on what they perceive to be a problem arising from the failure to provide discovery and the fact that they already had a comparison in hand.
Well, really, my reaction to the colloquy that occurred in the municipal court
I'm sure you have a different appraisal of it, is that it was basically counsel trying to manipulate the situation to get discovery and to coerce things from the prosecution or to cause the court to order certain things and to obfuscate the whole issue here. And that's basically what's happened. And now we see it perpetuated in these proceedings right now. But it's just the continuation of what happened in municipal court.
You could turn it around and say it was an attempt by the prosecution to manipulate the process because they had in hand a comparison and they were representing to the court that they needed more. And now they're seeking to use that refusal against the defendants, and also argued to the court at that time that they couldn't present this testimony unless they had the defendant's handwriting, which we now know is not their position.
Well, we would not have had any of this argument whatsoever if the defendants had just provided the sample. That's the bottom line here. All right, anything else?
Yes, Senator, just briefly, I think the court should also understand that between the time when there was a verbal notification that there had been a make based on firearms records and the time the refusal occurred on August 13th, the defense also had made attempts to have the documents which were used for the comparison released to them so that an independent handwriting expert could examine the items and render an opinion. And the defense was not successful in obtaining such an independent analysis because the prosecution resisted these efforts.
Okay, bear in mind that there's no law that requires the defense to have these things before the prosecution or the police obtain these samples. This is an investigative issue, and just because the defense wants these things and tries to coerce the prosecution into providing them by refusing to provide samples of handwriting doesn't mean that the defense had a right to them.
That's true, Your Honor, but I think it demonstrates that in acting during this period of time, the defense was trying to ensure the integrity of the process and trying to verify a verbal communication regarding the make, and was trying to seek their own expert on the issue.
Well, the inference then is that the defense was disputing that the defendants had purchased the weapons, and that was the issue that people were trying to prove, and therefore there was this consciousness of guilt, and that the defendants were trying to prevent the prosecution from ascertaining that evidence.
I think that another inference that could be drawn is that the defense was extremely concerned about the verbal notification of the make. There was never a report forthcoming. There was never a specification of the documents that were used to make the comparison, and they were interested in finding out who did the make and what documents were used to determine whether or not it was reliable. The other thing that I want to say, and then I'll sit down, is that I think this whole issue should be placed in context. Ms. Abramson admitted in her opening statement that there would be testimony that Eric is the one that wrote on the firearms records. So that this is really kind of a tempest in a teapot. It's a non-issue. We've offered to stipulate to Mr. Gross, and the prosecution has declined our offer to stipulate. And it just doesn't seem to me that we are going to, it doesn't seem to me that we should waste time deciding the various issues that are raised by the prosecution's being able to present evidence of the refusal.
All right, did the people wish to respond?
Just briefly, I think the defense would like to stipulate away our whole case so that no witnesses testify, but we are allowed to put on evidence, and I think this is probative evidence of consciousness of guilt. The events surrounding the purchase of the shotguns and how the defendants felt about purchasing the shotguns is at issue. We know that false identification was used, a false address was used, a false birthplace was used. And now we know that there was a reluctance on the part of the defendants to provide handwriting samples which would connect them with that purchase. And so that is our position.
All right, and from what the people have otherwise said and remarks to the court, it seems that the people's position also has been that the defense is put on the spot here of coming up with an explanation. And the prosecution has alleged in some fashions that there was a recently arrived at defense that to negate the issue of identity and premeditation, that there is something else here that that the prosecution basically has these things that they can prove otherwise. They can prove all of these things, and therefore the defense is conceding them and going on to some other defense rather than defense of identity or something else of that nature.
Excuse me, Your Honor, but
Yeah.
I'd like to be heard. I think that's really a very unfair position for the court to be taking. As if it is acknowledging, there's nothing new about that.
I'm not saying that. I'm saying that's the prosecution's theory.
But the prosecution has no basis to make that argument because we weren't required to give them any information about our defense until we were required by law, and then we did. So the fact that the defendants pleaded not guilty doesn't mean they weren't entitled to self-defense defense. The fact that they didn't reveal it to the prosecution is nothing extraordinary. And so I don't think that there's anything bolstering the fact that at the time this handwriting was requested, we had serious concerns about the integrity of the prosecution. I mean, we were also releasing these gun documents to the press prior to the time that they asked for an exemplar. And so I think we had, whether we were misguided or not, valid concerns. But I don't think that this evidence in any way, the refusal, bolsters an argument that they cannot document, that the defense is fabricated, at any time. From the inception, when, that might just get us to start testifying to the fact that we always knew this was the defense.
May I correct the record?
Yes.
The firearms forms were released by Judge Albrecht on court order.
Because the people didn't object.
They were, well, you indicated that the people released them. The people did not release them. They were released by Judge Albrecht. I just wanted the record to be correct.
All right. All right. This issue does not arise until we get the testimony of Mr. Linehan. Is that right?
Yes, and I believe, I was hoping for a ruling today, but Mr. Linehan won't be back until Monday since we have the next 2 days filled.
Okay. So then I'll consider the matter, and there's no need to rule on it at this point.
If I can just add one thing, Your Honor. In opening statements by counsel, Ms. Abramson indicated that Eric Menendez always carried around Donovan Goodrow's identification. She said that they went to get handguns at first, but realized that they had to wait a period of time. She then said that they just went out and weren't trying to hide anything. They bought these shotguns. So I think this is an indication that they were trying to hide something a year later, August 13th, 1990. So I think it's relevant to that.
All right. I understand the people's position. The defense has legitimate concerns as well, in that it does tend to confuse the issues. And I want to review this transcript that was presented to me today, and we'll have a ruling before the testimony of Mr. Linehan.
Would it be helpful for me to delineate other areas of the municipal court transcript in which this issue is discussed? Because I think it was discussed at length.
Certainly. Okay. I have not reviewed any of the transcripts from the municipal court, so whatever you have you want me to look at in this regard, I'll be glad to.
Okay, thank you.
You have Mr. Goodreau before both juries briefly, and then you have Mr. Gross. Is that right? And then what?
Well, then I can play the tape from the 17th of September.
For a while.
Well, let me say this, that we had the Eric Menendez jury come in at 1:30, and how long is the testimony going to take that caused them to be here today? Is there any?
Mr. Goodreau, Mr. Gross.
Well, how long is that going to take?
I don't know how long Mr. Gross is going to take. Some of these witnesses I think should take 20 minutes and they take an hour. So I can't, I'm sorry, Governor.
All right, I haven't seen any witnesses such as you described that haven't justified the length of examination that has occurred so far.
Mr. Gross would be very brief.
All right.
So unfortunately, our jury came today for about 15 minutes.
Is there anything that you have that you can present to the Eric Menendez jury?
No, Your Honor, if the court will recall, we were perhaps going to put Mr. Goodreau on for the issues that were litigated in the first.
I understand that,
Why
yes.
they came back.
Yeah.
Do we have anything else? I don't know.
Well, Mr. Corione has not yet finalized his decisions about the September 17th statement.
They are just about finalized. I'm going to meet with Ms. Moore to see if it should be done.
But we don't have a tape record to play for jury today.
Right.
And so that tape won't be played until sometime next week, as far as Eric Menendez is concerned.
That's correct.
How long is the tape recording for Lyle Menendez?
I believe it's in excess of an hour, in excess of 40 minutes.
And is there examination in addition to playing the tape?
No, I'm just going to ask the detective to authenticate it.
All right, well, we'll see if we can even get to that today, because it wouldn't make sense to start playing it without being able to finish it.
Yes, sir.
And as I understand the schedule, tomorrow you want to deal with Oziel and the burglaries and what else? Anything? I'm sorry? All right, well, that's part of Oziel's testimony. Anything else?
I believe they have a 402 issue on the Marina City condos and the Hotel Bel Air. They're going to fly in witnesses.
No, we can't do that tomorrow. Unfortunately, I can't get my witness back to Florida on Monday. I tried.
All right.
That doesn't have anything to do with those deals.
No, I'm just trying to figure out on Friday, then we're just going to go right into Oziel.
Correct, and we don't have any other witnesses scheduled. Do you want us to?
No, I think that should take the day on Friday. I'm just trying to determine whether we should start with the Lyle Menendez tape this afternoon. We'll see how long it takes to finish this other testimony then.
Okay.
All right, is there anything else then before the juries come in and deal with Goodreau and Gross?
Just briefly, Your Honor, just a correction for the record. Earlier, we had made reference to the transcript with regard to Mr. Stevens and the reference to the mafia issue. And I was using the reporter's transcript at that time, which I think we identified the page is page 68.
Okay.
We have the correct page, which is 8219, and starting at line 9.
All right. All right, thank you. Okay, let's get the juries. Yes.
We also need to deal with Calabasas.
Yes, I mentioned that, the burglaries. All right, let's get the juries in then, please. And the jury for the defendant, Eric Menendez, is in court as well. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
And we're ready to proceed here. And we have both juries in the courtroom at this time, and both defendants. And we'll now proceed with the testimony of Mr. Goodreau. Mr. Goodreau, you have previously been sworn. I'd ask that you state your name again for the record.
Donovan Goodreau.
All right, Ms. Lansing.
Thank you, Your Honor. Mr. Goodreau, you told us when you testified the other day that you had no contact with Lyle Menendez from the day he left the dorm room until you received a letter from him just a few weeks ago. Is that correct?
Yes, it is.
And, Your Honor, may I approach the witness?
You may.
I would ask you to look at a 4-page document, which is 61. The first page is a letter from me on my stationery, and then 3 handwritten pages. Do you recognize that?
Yes.
And is that the letter you were referring to that you received from Lyle Menendez?
Yes.
Several weeks ago?
Yes, it is.
And that's dated June of 1993?
Yes.
And did that letter in any way suggest that you shouldn't testify or what you should say?
No, not at all.
And did it in any way threaten or intimidate you or make you feel that you shouldn't come here and testify?
No.
Any questioning on behalf of Eric Menendez? Anything by the prosecution?
No, Your Honor.
All right, thank you, sir. You may step down.
Thank you.
You raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear that the testimony you may give in the cause and pending before this court shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes, I do.
Please take the stand and state your name for the record.
My name is Wesley Gross.
What are your last name, please?
Grose.
All right.
Mr. Gross, what do you do for a living, please?
I'm employed by the LA County District Attorney's Office as a forensic document examiner
How long have you been self-employed?
for the past 7 years.
And what kind of schooling did you go to, and what kind of training did you get in order to become a handwriting examiner?
My training began during my formal education, which was during my, I was obtaining a Master of Forensic Sciences degree at the George Washington University in Washington, D.C., where I took courses that involved the examination of forensic document examination. Following my schooling, I did an internship with the United States Secret Service in Washington, D.C. with the Forensic Services Division, where I worked with 8 different forensic document examiners, examined mostly handwriting on Treasury checks and threatening letters to the president. And then following that, I accepted a position with the County Auditor Controller's Office as a document examiner, where I worked for 2 years and completed my training there under the supervision of another document examiner. And then I came to be with the DA's office.
Did you conduct a handwriting comparison in regards to this particular case?
Yes, I did.
And were you provided with known samples of the handwriting of Eric Menendez and Lyle Menendez?
Yes.
Counsel for Lyle Menendez, would you stipulate that Mr. Gross has in his possession known samples of handwriting of your client?
Yes.
And counsel for Eric Menendez, would you stipulate that Mr. Gross has in his possession known samples of the handwriting of your client?
Yes.
Thank you. Now, Mr. Gross, I've just used the term, and I think you did too, known samples. Could you tell the jury what a known sample is?
Sure. A known sample is writing which is attributed to a particular writer by whoever presents the case to me, where they have some basis for knowing that a particular person wrote that writing. Since I don't take writing samples from any individuals, they bring writing to me, they tell me this was done by one particular person, and then that is what we consider known writing.
Now, there's another kind of document that you deal with in your profession as well that's called a question document.
Yes.
Hence the term question document examiner.
Yes.
Okay. A question document, then, could you tell us what that is?
Sure. A question document is any document which comes into question, usually in the legal process and in the type of work I do, specifically in criminal cases, where there comes to be a question as to whether or not the writing on a document or typewriting or printing was done by a particular person, or is it a counterfeit document or something like that. So anytime there's questions about a document, then it's titled a question document.
And were you submitted a question document in this case as well as the known samples?
Yes.
Your Honor, may I approach, please?
Yes.
I have one more known sample, and it's been marked as Exhibit 51. I'm going to show it to you now and ask you if you recognize having reviewed it in your analysis.
Yes.
And for the record, 51 are the signatures of Mr. Donovan Goodreau, which resembles some sort of medical chart. Anyway, Your Honor, I'm going to. I have here exhibit, I believe this is 53. I'd like to ask you if you recognize the blow up of what you worked with.
Yes.
You worked with the smaller original forms, is that correct?
Yes.
Now, when this was submitted to you, which portion of this document 53 was considered the question portion, if you recall?
Only the signature.
Okay, and on this page, the signature appears to be marked with a yellowish pen.
Yeah. Yes.
In addition, were you asked to try to determine the origin of two other signatures that appear to be the same name?
Yes.
On the other 2 pages?
Yes.
Now, there's terminology that's used by handwriting examiners, which is particular to handwriting examiners.
Yeah.
Okay, now,
When you determine that handwriting belongs to a particular person, how do you refer to that?
If that was my conclusion.
Yes, I'm not talking about this case. I'm talking about in general.
In general, you can make a positive identification of the writer, saying that whoever wrote the known documents wrote the question documents. But that basically you identify who the writer is.
Now, is that the kind of identification that's 100%? In other words, it's this person and nobody else in the whole world?
Yes.
Okay. And what are the degrees of certainty that you have in your profession?
It depends on the examiner, but in general, the accepted terminology would range anywhere from a totally inconclusive, where you can make no determination, all the way up to say that positively somebody wrote it or positively someone did not write it. And then there's about usually 2 or 3 steps in between there of certainty.
And so you can also eliminate people as having written things too. Is that correct?
Yes.
Right. Now, in this particular example, having the known handwriting of Donovan Goodreau, Eric Menendez, and Lyle Menendez, were you able to determine who actually made the signature, which is depicted on the 3 signatures on 53?
Are you asking me, was I positively able to determine that?
Right.
No, I was not.
Okay. And why weren't you able to?
Because in this signature in particular, it appeared to be a simulation of a true signature. And usually when a simulation is involved, it's very difficult
and usually impossible to determine the author.
You know, what is a simulation?
Simulation is where somebody, well, there's actually a couple kinds of simulation. You have a simulation where someone knows what the signature looks like, and they're trying to simulate it, make it appear that it is a true signature. And you also have some, that comes into two categories. One where you're actually copying it. You have a signature, true signature right in front of you, and you try and copy it as close as you can. Then you have a type where you're doing it from your memory, and you're trying to remember how it was and simulate the writing. And then another type is where you're simulating someone's writing without having any model to go from. You don't even really know how they write. You just simulate a signature.
Right? Can you tell from the signature what kind of simulation it is?
But it appears that they had a model to go from,
How can you say that?
based on having seen the true signatures of Donovan Goodreau.
Right.
There was an attempt to make it look like the true signature of Donovan Goodreau.
Now, were you able to, I take it you were not able to make this 100%, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Now, when you, as an expert, come into court and say, I'm making this 100%, you're excluding everybody in the world. Is that correct?
Yes.
All right. But if you had to choose between the signature of Donovan Goodreau, Eric Menendez, or Lyle Menendez, do you have an opinion as to which handwriting most probably made the signature on the form?
Yes.
And is most probably something you're comfortable with, or would you rather use different terminology?
No, most probably is fine.
All right. And what was your opinion?
Most probably was Eric.
And Eric Menendez, is that correct?
Yes.
Now, did you notice anything about the spelling of the name in the signatures that are depicted on 53?
Yes.
What did you notice?
The names are misspelled on all three signatures that are in question.
All right. And as to the first, do you recall how they're misspelled?
I believe it's the last name Goodreau. The U was left off the end on all three.
I have nothing further. This one.
Thank you, Your Honor. Mr. Gross, my understanding is that you believe that the writer simulated Donovan Goodreau's signature, correct?
Correct.
But misspelled the name in the simulation.
Correct.
Okay. And you believe that there was a model that was used in order to try and simulate Donovan Goodreau's name, correct?
Well, the person who signed it would have had to know how he signed his name, yes.
Okay. And models of handwriting often appears on things like driver's license, right?
Yes.
And let me show you an exhibit which has been marked as 49A and B. May I have a moment?
Yes.
May I approach, Your Honor? Thank you. I'm showing you an exhibit that's marked 49A. Would you look at this and see if it appears to be a Donovan Goodreau driver's license?
Yes.
Okay, and does that driver's license also appear to have a signature on it?
Yes, it does.
And that kind of looks like the signature that's on the known exemplars for Donovan Goodreau, which I believe 51.
Actually, it doesn't look a whole lot like those, but if you, I had a better copy of it.
You have a better copy?
Yes.
Okay. Mr. Gross, would additional handwriting exemplars from either Eric or Lyle Menendez have aided you in making your determination?
No.
Why?
I had an extensive amount of writing to work with, so I didn't need any additional writing.
All right, thank you very much.
Yes. Mr. Gross, when did you make your examination of the question documents?
I made it, I believe it was in July of last year.
And before you made your examination, did another handwriting expert examine the documents?
I believe so. I was told so.
And was that Mr. Glenn Owens of the California Department of Justice?
That's what I was told,
I
yes.
object to any further questions as being here, so Your Honor.
Let me lay a foundation if I could. All right. Did you have available and doing either before or at the time of your examination the report by Mr. Owens?
No, sir.
You never saw it at
No.
any point in time?
I don't recall ever seeing it.
During your direct examination, you mentioned they. Do you remember that? Something about they used a model.
Oh, if that sounds plural, is that what you mean?
Well, my question is there any indication on the question documents that more than one person was writing on the document?
No.
Were there indications based on your examination that Lyle Menendez did not write the question document?
Not in a positive, I could not positively eliminate him, no.
Well, let me ask you if you can explain this statement. Basic letter formation differences suggest another writer is responsible. What does that mean?
That means that the letter designs that were used are not the way that writer would form those letters.
And were there basic letter formation differences between the question documents on the one hand and Lyle Menendez's known writing on the other?
Yes.
That's all I have. Thank you.
No, Your Honor.
Thank you.
All right, the court has discussed the next piece of evidence with both sides here, and what they had intended to do is play some tape recordings, but each tape recording will last longer than the remaining amount of time we have here this afternoon, and it wouldn't really be an effective way of presenting the evidence to have it broken up by starting a tape and then stopping it and resuming again, which would otherwise occur. So we're going to take our break now, and I would indicate to the Eric Menendez jury that we really expected you to be here for more than what you heard today, and we certainly didn't want you to come in just for such a short amount of evidence that was presented to you, but sometimes that happens, and we apologize for that. But we'll take an early recess today, and we'll resume on Friday. As I've indicated, the Eric Menendez jury will be here first at 9 o'clock, and we'll start with you. And then the Lyle Menendez jury will be coming in at 10:30, and then hopefully we'll have finished with the evidence that the Eric Menendez jury alone will have heard, and then we'll pick up with the Lyle Menendez jury as well. And just to remind you all of things that I've already told you, don't discuss this case among yourselves or with anyone else. Don't form any final opinions about the case. Don't look at or listen to any of the news coverage, and don't permit yourselves to be in a situation where you might overhear anybody else discussing the case. And we'll recess now, and we'll resume on Friday at 9 o'clock for the Eric Menendez jury and 10:30 for the Lyle Menendez jury. And when you check in at 10:30, if you would go next door, and the Eric Menendez jury come in here at 9 o'clock on Friday. Tomorrow, we will not be in session. All right, thank you all very much. All right, we're still on the record here. Yes.
I just wanted to understand that what we were hoping to be able to do tomorrow is have 402 hearings that deal with aspects of the psychotherapist patient privilege. And therefore, we're going to ask them that some of those hearings be in camera, excluding the prosecution.
All right, when that arises, you let me know. Is there anything specifically you wanted me to review other than the transcript that was presented to me with the underlining in it or the highlighting?
I stood out those, right?
Yes.
We filed with the court today a response to the prosecution's motion on evidence of section 1016, and it would be our position that we would like some preliminary ruling from the court prior to cross-examination of Dr. Oziel, if the court could give us that ruling. I realize that nothing would be etched in stone and that things could change, but I think there are issues presented there that the court could rule on.
All right. I haven't read it yet, but my initial reaction after having thought of it is that
until the defense really puts on its case, it's really almost impossible to deal with the people's position that the patient-therapist privilege is waived as to Dr. Oziel and as to any others, because it's unclear now what exactly the defense is going to be doing by way of offering evidence. Perhaps you address that in your memorandum. I don't know. I've read it.
We do. And just to indicate to the court that there is an offer approved. It's not specific, and again, we don't expect the court to be bound by it if the evidence were to change, but the general outlines of our defense are offered in the memorandum, so we'd ask the court to look at it with that in mind.
Certainly.
Thank you.
Yeah, there is something else I would like to take a look at, and that is the documents seized pursuant to search warrant of Dr. Oziel.
All of them?
There has been, and I think there's already a public record that we're talking about appointment and ledger type materials. And I think it would help the court in trying to deal with some of the things if you take a look at those records.
Okay, I have them. I can do that. Anything else?
Yes, John, I'd just like to point out that until the defense actually tenders it, and I don't mean just because they say they're going to tender it, but tender it in the formal sense, I don't know how the people can argue it, because until we know the full depth of the defense and the items testified to by certain witnesses, I don't know how I can say that there's been a tendering of their trial mental state, such that, I mean, this is an anticipation of them tendering it.
Yeah, well, your position is at this point, there is no waiver of the patient psychotherapist privilege other than that which has been ruled by the California Supreme Court.
Correct.
And that only if the waiver occurs during the defense presentation would the memorandum that you have filed become an issue.
Correct, unless they wish to waive it right now. If they want to waive the psychotherapist patient privilege, then we can address the issue, but I don't think they're willing to do that.
All right, nice try, Ms. Ferraro.
I think it's very clear that we are never going to waive it. And I think the court still should, I mean, you will, of course, read our pleading, because I think our point is that the kind of defense that we are putting on does not tender mental state in the way that 1016 and the cases that interpret 1016 describe tendering mental state. But we do need the court to at least give us some tentative parameters, because we don't want to inadvertently waive it. So
Well,
we do need some guidance, and that's really what we need to address with the court tomorrow about Dr. Oziel, which is some guidelines about if we do X, have we opened the door on Y? And we're very concerned about the privilege issues.
Well, I'll read it, but even with that in mind, you can't expect the court to rule in a vacuum either, and then to fall back on a position later on in the trial, such as, Judge, you told us if we did this, then we'd be okay, and now you're saying we're not okay, and the court in making its initial ruling was not presented with sufficient information to make a decision that really should be binding on the court. So that's the problem. And a lot of these in limine matters that things change and circumstances change. So you might get a tentative ruling that you think is just what you want, and then proceed with that understanding, and then end up in an awkward situation later on. And then you'd be looking at the court as the person or the institution that caused your problems. And that's not the way it's going to be. Mr. Berger,
we do take the position, maybe we're overstating the rule, but we do take the position that the rule is relatively clear, and that we are clearly in a case like this with our type of defense not tendering. But we'll be honest.
Yeah, well, what I could respond briefly is that if that's your position, it's so clear cut, then you don't really need me to give any preliminary rulings. It's obvious. Even I would understand that.
Well, but Judge, sometimes we don't see things exactly.
That's true.
I am sure, however, that you will understand.
All right, Mr. Burt, you were going to say
Well, I
something.
just wanted to indicate to the court that based on what Ms. Bazanich just said, it appears that she's backsliding somewhat, because as I read the papers, the position she was taking was by making an opening statement and tendering the issue of self-defense or imperfect self-defense or heat of passion voluntary manslaughter, that we had somehow opened the door at this point. And that's one of the issues addressed in the pleadings. She now appears to be saying that no issue has been tendered up to this point, and the court is totally incapable of ruling because you'd be ruling in a vacuum. The only thing we want to get from the court is some indication as to whether her initial position set forth in the papers is correct. We think it's not. We haven't tendered any issue of mental or emotional condition. And second of all, to get some feel from the court as to what the court feels tendering mental or emotional condition would be based on the case law. And the cases are outlined, and I think the position we've stated is one that the court can rule on, and the court is not ruling in a vacuum because the court has heard the opening statements and the general nature of the defense. And again, we're not asking the court to make a ruling that is going to bind the court forever. We realize that there are certain dangers, and just to get an indication from the court at this point would be important to us.
Okay. Anything else?
No.
All right, we'll be in recess till tomorrow at 9.
She started from nothing and really built her way up. There was the glam, there was the beauty, there were the cars, the houses.
Srimati Indranee Mukherjee, the CEO of INX Media.
What has happened to Sheena?
Breaking news just coming in. Media tycoon Indranee Mukherjee has been arrested by the Mumbai police on charges of murdering her sister almost 3 years ago.
It's a case that has confused, fascinated, and shocked us all.
What is the precise motive that could have led Indranee to kill Sheena in cold-blooded murder?
Go on then. Ask me whatever you need to.
Each and every character of this particular story is extremely unique. Everybody has got their individual agendas.
Sheena, who till yesterday we thought was Indranee's sister, has turned out to be her daughter.
स्टार्टिंग में अगर एक झूठ ब्रॉडकास्ट हो जाता है, सबको ये जानना जरूरी है कि पहला सच है क्या.
Peter's son, Indranee's daughter are involved.
The son of the current husband is seeing the daughter of Indranee's previous marriage.
The family themselves, they're leaking a story a minute.
Do I believe someone within the family knows what's happened to Sheena? Absolutely.
Did you murder your daughter, Sheena?
What a stupid question.